3 years ago, a natural disaster occurred on Earth, forcing the familiar flora and fauna to undergo dramatic changes. Many people died, but those who survived soon gained the ability to control the monsters that appeared, and the most capable of these people were called trainers. Gao Peng, an 18-year-old orphaned high school student, dreams of becoming one of these gifted people, even despite his recent problem. Recently, Gao Peng began to often see strange system windows appearing out of nowhere in the air, but he believed that these were just hallucinations from stress. Returning home today, on the landing, he suddenly encountered one of the many monsters, and then the strange system window instantly changed, giving its full description. As soon as Penn thought that this no longer looked like a glitch, a spider, almost larger than himself, rushed to attack. Previously, the teacher had told Penn that striped gray spiders were cute and gentle, but now it seemed that this was completely wrong. He ran screaming, trying to get away from the aggressive spider. However, it was incredibly fast and still did not retreat, chasing him. Trying to figure out how to cope with the monster and survive, Gao Peng accidentally caught his eye on the system window with a picture of a spider, where it was written that its weakness was fire. Without thinking for a second, the guy took a lighter out of his pocket and threw it open right at the monster, causing it to burst into flames. Penn was already rejoicing at his victory when he suddenly saw that the fire from the lighter was too weak for such a monster, and he rose again, even more ferocious than before. But Penn was almost there, one more floor, and he reached the door of his apartment, shouting out the name Dazi at the last moment. The door immediately swung open and something huge, much larger than himself, threw the gray spider aside, saving Gao Peng. Having recovered his breath after the chase, the guy looked with superiority at the defeated spider trembling in the corner, because behind him now towered his own monster, much stronger and more dangerous. The defeated spider immediately hurried to retreat with great speed, the giant centipede instilling considerable terror in it. The 2-meter centipede, seeing that the enemy had escaped, changed its form to a non-combat one and began to demand to be fed through a telepathic connection with Penn. The guy, glad that the recent nightmare was over, patted his pet on the head and retired to the kitchen to prepare food for them. Thanks to his excellent cooking skills, he quickly prepared a delicious, nutritious dinner, leaving his pet delighted. Watching him eat, Penn was surprised to notice a new line in the system window that he had not seen before. This was an opportunity for evolution for his pet from a general level to an advanced one. This news delighted the guy, and he promised that he would definitely upgrade his pet, immediately starting to look at the requirements for evolution. Most of the materials were not difficult to obtain, but the need for the Thunder Monster core stumped him, since its price was a whopping 10 credits, equal to 100,000 coins in modern currency. Having become an orphan after his parents' accident, Penn received a payment from the state of 20 credits, of which there are only 11 left at the moment, but he could not spend everything he has on evolution. The guy was gnawed by resentment for the inability to use the most valuable information only because of a lack of funds. And at that moment, he had the epiphany that he could use the information from the system to become an outstanding coach and no longer worry about waste. Penn remembered the teacher's words that the trainer exam would be held tomorrow, and he hurried to register, becoming one of the participants at the last moment. On the morning before the exam, Gao Ping stopped by his neighbor Tang Tang, asking him to take care of his pet while he was away. The girl kindly agreed to help him, but as soon as the guy left, she was overcome with bewilderment as to why Pan needed a monster with average skills. Tang Tang immediately hurried to make a call, reporting to a certain man that Peng was stubbornly fiddling with the useless purple centipede left to him by the man's parents, daughter, and son-in-law. The girl also assured her interlocutor that Pan was safe next to her, recalling the part of the matter that was unfinished by the man. After finishing the conversation, the gray-haired man was angry. He threatened his secretary that his employees only had a few months left to complete the task. However, no matter how formidable the chairman was, as soon as he remembered his grandson, he began to dream of meeting him as soon as possible after completing his work for this year. Meanwhile, Peng had already arrived at the exam site, looking around at the crowd of people surrounding him and marveling at the popularity of the coaching profession. At some point, he was called out. It turned out to be his aunt with her daughter and son, who was about to try to pass this exam for the 4th time. They were extremely surprised to learn that this time Peng did not come as a spectator, but also decided to try his hand as a coach. But despite his rather young age, the woman was glad that he decided to participate and began to encourage him. Hearing this, surrounded by 2 guards, the unpleasant man nearby began to mock that trash like them wanted to be a coach. But upon hearing Pan's easy retort that passing the exam depends on the level of intelligence, not wealth, he was deflated and left, because he had already failed 4 such exams before. They were interrupted by a sudden noise, signaling the opening of the monster breeding exam and inviting them to enter the building. The man who greeted them, Feng Shu, was a scholar of Chang'an City and the chief examiner, and it was he who told them about the stages of the exam. The first of these was a written test, selecting those who could pass to the second stage. In the task, they were given 3 short videos of a monster, after watching which they had to describe it in detail. A video appeared on the projector with a monster of impressive size hidden in the water, which was visible only in a silhouette, sharp fins and eyes glowing with a bright blue light with a pattern on its body. Before the participants had time to really look at the creature, the screen went dark, indicating the end of the video. The designated time for description of 20 minutes caused the participants to panic, because they did not even have time to look at the monster shown to them. One of the few who felt confident was Gao Ping, because with the help of the system he was able to find out all the information he was interested in. The descriptions of the next 2 monsters from the videos also did not cause him any problems. Gao Ping was absolutely confident in his answers when it came time to submit his papers and looked forward to the results. An hour later, the examiner began to announce the names of the participants who passed the written test. Among those named were his aunt and the unpleasant man with whom they had crossed paths earlier. But Pan's name was not mentioned among those listed, and the unpleasant man did not miss his chance to gloat. Meanwhile, the guy was sitting on pins and needles. He was panicking, wondering that these systems could be wrong. The next thing the examiner asked the audience was who among those present was Gao Ping. Not expecting this, the guy responded a little embarrassedly, raising his hand. The examiner began to applaud, because he did not expect that the candidate who received the highest score for the written part would be so young. The rest of the participants were perplexed. They could not believe that such a young man had passed the exam, and even managed to score the highest score. Those few who passed the written stage were led from the classroom by examiner Feng Shu to the hall to take the practical stage of the exam. The man explained that in the rooms behind him there were monsters that the test subjects needed to force to evolve within a week. To pass this stage, all kinds of materials for evolution were also provided, which could be used in limited quantities free of charge to those who passed. Those who fail will have to cover all costs for materials themselves. After the task was announced, the participants began to draw lots for the room number of the monster that they would get. The effect of unpredictability worried Pan. He could only hope for luck. He didn't notice the invisible beast in the box of lots or the grin of one of the examiners. As a result, Pan got room number 10 and his aunt got room number 6, and they went towards their rooms. Feng Shu announced the official start of the practical exam. Having reached room number 10, Pan greeted its guard, who said that you could contact him if you needed anything. As soon as the issued pass was applied to the lock, the door swung open and a simply murderous aura of the beast came out of it. Walking towards the cage, Pan saw a dark shadow behind the thick bars of the bars, with hot, furious, bright scarlet eyes, the mere glance of which made one feel uneasy. But the guy paid attention not to this at all, but to the line in the system window, where it was written that the Red River monkey provided to him was sick and in a weak condition. When asked what happened to her, the person in charge of the room explained that too many experiments had been carried out on this monster before, and she had to be destroyed. No one knew that the real reason for this monster's participation in the exam was the director's deal with an unpleasant rich man who cheated through the written exam. The person in charge of the room recognized that the situation was not fair and the monkey was already on edge. So he suggested that Peng apply for next year and keep his writing scores. He did not take into account the fact that Peng was stubborn in life, and giving up was completely not in his style. The guard left him in the room alone with the monster and left. And meanwhile, the gorilla crawled out of the shadow of the cage and looked at the guy with its hunted gaze, in which one could read a huge series of unsuccessful experiments. Bitterness, resentment, and anger intricately mixed into a kind of madness, forcing him to throw himself with a roar at the thick bars of the cage. But Pan had already managed to read in his gaze the sea of regrets that was hidden behind a mask of aggression. To the monster's surprise, the guy came closer and without fear put his hand on his head, promising that he would definitely cure him. Peng decided not to delay and immediately find out what was needed for the evolution of a monkey, and was greatly amazed by what he saw, because the system showed 2 paths of evolution, standard and distorted. The standard evolution path sounded much safer and involved clearing the monster of a huge amount of dark energy, but the limited materials simply would not be enough, so Pan decided that he would have to take a risk. The room guard was amazed to receive a list of necessary materials from Pan, and, looking at the confidence of the test subject, decided that he was just another theorist who could not do anything in practice, but did not argue. 3 days later, many examinees had already failed the test, but Peng continued to follow the system's instructions. The black herb of the east worked as it should, and the monkey was fully restored according to plan. Now the last stage remained, but before that the monster had to be released from the cage, and Pan was afraid that after all the experiments the monster would rebel. After some deliberation, Pan made up his mind, because he had come too far to retreat now. He took a big risk when he unlocked the cage, and managed to get scared when the monster ran at him. But his fears were in vain. The monkey treated him very cordially and rushed to hug him, thereby raising Pan's spirits. The last stage before the evolution of the monster was taking a bath with sulfuric acid, and from the outside, it looked like something very dangerous. Out of curiosity, the monkey threw a clump of his hair into the dark liquid, after which it immediately dissolved, and panicked. Peng understood his fears but asked him to trust him, and promised that after this stage he would evolve. Despite all the torment and fears, the monster made up his mind and followed Pan's instructions, climbing into the bathtub with a dangerous solution. Suddenly, a huge amount of black smoke poured out from his side, filling the entire space of the laboratory. This caused the fire alarm to go off and the alarm to sound in the surveillance office, and backup immediately rushed in to put out the suspected fire. The security was extremely surprised when no fire was found in the room. The space was filled only with black smoke that was already dissipating. Noticing the arrivals, Pan was extremely surprised. He asked what brought them to room number 10. Joe, the room's security guard, explained that the smoke caused the fire alarm to go off and they rushed to put out the fire. Pan felt a little guilty and apologized for not noticing the alarm going off, being too caught up in the experiment. Zhu radioed that everything was fine and the alarm could be turned off. Examiner Feng Shu, who arrived at the laboratory, was extremely surprised that the smoke in the laboratory was caused by an experiment on a monster. The rest of the participants, who came running to see what was happening, began to discuss that Gao Peng was too young and inexperienced to experiment on monsters. Meanwhile, Wang, who had been trying to frame Peng from the very beginning of the practical stage of the exam, was jubilant, believing that the young man had finally failed. While everyone was distracted, the bathtub with a strange dark liquid began to bubble and hiss, releasing something that none of those present expected. It was a previously unseen monster, terrifying in its appearance and aura, instilling fear. Those around were stunned. They did not know what to do and were already preparing to run away. Meanwhile, the monster had risen. His body was a huge skeleton, dressed in a translucent shell glowing with violet fire and piercing with a fiery otherworldly gaze. With surprise, Feng Shu suddenly realized that it was the evolved red river monkey that was given to the examinee Gao Peng. Everyone was amazed that the young man actually managed to achieve the result. Peng was pleased with what he saw. The system reported that the distorted evolution was completed successfully, and the monster had evolved into an ideal class bone monkey. Those present were stunned. They began to look at the evolved monster with admiration, suggesting that this monster most likely belonged to a completely new species. Feng Shu completely agreed that breeding an undead class monster was amazing. However, in Feng Shu's opinion, there was someone more valuable than this monster in this room, and it was the test subject who forced it to evolve. The examiner praised Peng, because now he sees that he got first place for the written part for a reason. The evolved monkey attracted Pan's attention by tugging at his t-shirt. Pan assured him that everything was fine now. He was finally able to evolve. The huge bone monkey would have cried again if he could. He was very touched that Pan had fulfilled his promise to him, and everything worked out. The director, who was watching them from the side, was overcome with greed. He was already looking forward to getting such a valuable monster into his hands. However, his dreams were suddenly interrupted by the will of Feng Shu, who impressively declared that this monster now belongs to Peng, since there is such a trusting relationship between them. The rest were amazed at this decision. No one expected such an outcome. Gao Ping was also very surprised. He asked again whether Feng Shu understood correctly that the rare ideal level undead class monster now simply belonged to him. Feng Shu confirmed his words, adding that this is a new type of monster, of which there are no records yet, but it was Peng who forced it to evolve. Peng seriously thought about his words, pondering the fact that the monkey monster had immediately evolved from a general level to an excellent one, which means that in the future, it could even become a commander. This promised amazing prospects. Seeing his thoughtfulness, Zhou offered to give the monster to him if Peng did not want to take the attached monster for himself. which would be a rather stupid decision. The director decided to contact this decision. He said that this was against the rules, and any successfully evolved monster ultimately goes to the association, and added that the monkey was very sick and the evolution could just be an accident and not the merit of Pan. His words were supported by Van, who became indignant that the evolution of a monster on the verge of death was impossible, and an overly strong monkey should be destroyed. The director continued to insist that the monster was too strong and dangerous, and that a student could not achieve such a result. Together, the two made a serious allegation that Peng may have cheated on the exam, and that his result could not be considered genuine. The director theorized that Peng might have learned some method that accidentally worked, but his true skills could not match the result. Feng Shu was extremely skeptical when he said that he should cancel the result for such a reason. When the director said that issuing a certificate to Gao Peng could harm the reputation of the association, Feng Shu laughed sincerely. He invited the guy to independently prove to these fools what he was capable of. Peng said that he came to the association to obtain a license and not to prove anything to anyone, and expressed that disbelief in the result of a younger and more talented coach is a rather pathetic behavior. Peng began to explain that the name of the monster Red River Monkey comes from their habitat, but the monster's attribute has nothing to do with water. However, judging by the monkey's condition, the previous test subjects did not know this and loaded the monkey with the water attribute and yin energy in hopes of evolution, although yin is the monkey's main weakness. Wang was outraged that Peng was wrong, and the Red River Monkey's main weakness was the wood attribute. But Feng Shu clarified that according to research, Peng was not wrong. Peng continued to explain that due to many experiments, the yin attribute had become too ingrained into the monster's structure, and it was too problematic to remove it, so he took a different route. For 3 days, Peng gave the monkey the black grass of the east to purify the body, the yin attribute as the base, materials, and the crystal core with the undead attribute. The main role in the monster's evolution was played by the order of addition and proportions, so almost anyone in Pan's place would have failed. Feng Shu clapped at his explanation and added that instead of getting a beginner trainer certificate, Peng should get an intermediate level certificate. Moreover, according to the examiner, Peng will not have any difficulty in passing the advanced level certificate exam at Yangjing headquarters. On this positive note, Feng turned to the principal and Wang, returning to the issue of cheating, as both had previously mentioned that the monkey was a tainted specimen for the exam. The rest of the examinees agreed that this was a completely strange statement. Zhou volunteered to witness the director's misconduct, saying that he deliberately provided a corrupt monster. He also mentioned that a bribe from Vash Shu was to blame, and that CCTV footage could confirm this. Wang Shu at that moment felt that it was all over, because his deception had been exposed. Feng Shu, as the president of the city association, stated that for committing fraud, which is a crime, Wang Shu will be suspended from taking the exam in Chang'an City for the next 3 years, and the director will be removed from his position. Everyone present agreed with this decision, watching as the criminals were taken out of the room. President Feng invited Peng to have a cup of tea to talk and ask for a favor. Later, in his office, Feng asked Peng to become the representative of Chang'an City at the World Monster Trainer Tournament. He explained that there were very few talented trainers in their city, which was why they had not won prizes in trainer tournaments for the past few years, but Peng could do it. The guy was puzzled. He was worried about the fact that he was being offered to take part in a world-class tournament. Peng almost refused, but as soon as Mr. Feng mentioned that the winner would receive 10,000 credits, he suddenly changed his mind. The prospect of receiving a huge sum forced Peng to take responsibility and agree to participate. Later, on the way home, Peng was happy to receive an intermediate-level certificate. He was happy because having such a certificate gave plus 30 points when entering college. Moreover, passing the exam earned him an elite monster and a chance to get a lot of money, as well as the best of privileges, a good relationship with the director of the association. Remembering his agreement to participate in the tournament, Pan wondered whether he could win, and that it would definitely not be easy at all. People on public transport behind Peng, watching from the sidelines at his new monster Buchan, whose name he gave for his sometimes stupid and sometimes scary appearance, began to whisper. They discussed how rare the undead class was, and one of them even wanted to touch one of the bones of the amazing monster. Buchan did not force himself to react. He did not miss a single movement around him, believing that by doing so he was protecting Pan. Soon, unnoticed by Pan, the unfamiliar, frivolous guy was entangled in the power of Buchan. The hostage had already regretted his desire and almost said goodbye to life out of fear. When Pan turned to him, distracting him. The guy shared his thoughts that participation in the tournament is a necessary measure, because without winning, he will have nothing to feed his pets. Pan also noted that he is young, and if he puts in a lot of effort every day, he will have a bright future, especially considering that he is quite handsome. Those who noticed their conversation were amazed, because speaking out loud meant that the guy did not have a blood contract with the monster, but he listened to him. They were tormented by the question of when such a talented guy appeared in the city. Later, when they got off the bus, Buchan suddenly pushed Pan to the side, causing him to fly off. The monster deflected something flying towards Pan, protecting its master. At first, Pan was extremely puzzled by what had happened, but then he realized what exactly had happened and hastened to calm Buchan, explaining that no one had attacked him. He immediately noticed that the object flying towards him was Dazi, his purple centipede, so he rushed to introduce it, but was very surprised. Chung was puzzled by the appearance of his pet, because he did not look like himself. During the time that they had not seen each other, he had changed a lot. Following Z, Tang Tang approached them, greeting them and informing them that they had decided to meet Peng together. Without delaying it for later, the guy immediately began to ask what happened to his pet. Because it was several times larger than before, the plump centipede resembled some kind of predatory caterpillar in its appearance. Tang Tang explained that Dazi ate with great appetite, so now he looks full and strong. Pan was not happy because he saw that his monster was simply overfed. Tan Tan was extremely pleased with herself, because thanks to her, the centipede now looked not so small and puny in her opinion. Bu-chan, seeing Datsu, was very proud of himself, believing that he looked even better compared to him with his huge and strong, toned body. Tang Tang brushed off his reaction and began asking about how Ping's exam went. The guy began to sheepishly talk about how he was lucky to get a monster to evolve after 6 unsuccessful attempts, and that he was able to receive a certificate as an intermediate-level trainer for his merits. Pan pointed to Buchan, showing which monster he meant, and said that his efforts were appreciated and he was given the bread monster as a gift. Tang Tang was amazed and found it hard to believe that Peng had received an intermediate certificate right away. Satisfied, Peng took out a certificate from his bag, showing that he was not cheating, pleased with himself. Seeing that the guy in front of her was honest, Tang Tang was very happy for him. As an aunt, she was very proud that her nephew had already grown up so much and was able to achieve success. But the next statement that they needed to talk seriously surprised Pan. His aunt began to tell him that the profession of a trainer is valued precisely because all existing monsters actually do not belong to their world. Tan Tan spoke about the secret technique of familiars, constellation shift, which transfers all the damage received by the owner to the pet. The technique has some limitations due to distance and the pet's consent, but makes sense since monsters are much stronger and tougher than humans. After studying the technique, Peng had the feeling that he and Dazi were connected by an invisible thread. Now the connection had been established, and Peng was still thinking that Tang had given very valuable information after his monologue. But the origin of that information was shrouded in mystery. Looking at Z, who crawled towards him, Peng complained about how his pet had gotten fat, suggesting that he should be called a purple piggy instead of a centipede. Peng asked Buchan to bring a mirror so that Su could see the scale of the disaster, and this had an effect. Dazi was too impressed and saddened. It was hard for him to face the cruel reality in the mirror, to which Peng began to say that he should start doing exercise and losing weight in the next couple of days, after which pumping will begin. Peng imagined what would happen if Z evolved in his current state and was horrified. He did not want this to actually happen. The next day, Peng met with Tan Tan at her request, promising to help. Ant was extremely happy that he received the certificate and counted on Peng's help. While they were getting to the right place, Ten brought him up to date, telling him that she had previously opened a company together with her friends and invested a lot of money, but their partner ran away, taking everything with him, including the trainers. Peng was surprised that their office was located in the most prestigious area of the city. He suspected that rent here was very expensive. The aunt felt awkward from his words and began to make excuses by saying that business had been good before, so she rented this place. But after the trainers left, business began to decline. Pan decided that his aunt was behaving extremely suspiciously, but did not say anything out loud. Tang Tang said that the office was on the 3rd floor and that she would give Peng the best conditions in the trainer market, as well as 20% of the company's shares. She also said that this work would not interfere with her studies in any way, and that Peng could come at any time free from classes. Peng was perplexed by the level of his salary and said that for the same money his aunt could hire 2 coaches at once, but she objected that in this case it was a matter of quality, not quantity. This seemed strange to Peng. First a scroll with a secret technique, then an exorbitant payment. If anyone else had been Tang Tang, he would have already suspected something was wrong. But it was Ant who took care of Pan when he was orphaned. And if anyone could be trusted, it was her. Therefore, casting aside doubts and suspicions, he decided to follow her. Tang Tang, meanwhile, was very excited. She was very worried, and was glad that Peng was not too suspicious of her and did not notice anything. Upon arriving at the office, the two of them were greeted by a rather pretty girl, whom Tang Tang introduced as Shun Xuan's secretary, and Peng as a coach hired by the company. Having finished with the introductions, Tan ran off to run errands, leaving the acquaintance with her colleagues and the office to the two of them. Such frivolous and unpredictable behavior always confused Pan, but he could not do anything about it. Wen kindly invited the guy into the office to fill out employment documents. While filling out the information, Xuan was disappointed in Peng. Comparing his age with the intermediate-level certificate, she decided that he was a stupid guy with a lot of money who got the certificate by cheating. Peng, meanwhile, was talking about the size of his salary and came to the conclusion that he should not underestimate his abilities because his evolution method gives 100% results, which no coach can do. After finishing entering the data, Xuan returned the certificate to Gao Peng, saying that the registration was completed. But the girl also doubted Peng's chosen pay rate because he had too little experience, and if he lacked the skills, the organization's reputation would also suffer. Pan was extremely dissatisfied with the doubts expressed by the girl and wanted to be indignant on this score, but he was interrupted. The office door swung open and a man burst into the office, demanding that Peng prove with his deeds that he was worthy of the salary he had designated. The man, looking both furious and exhausted, also said that if Peng could cure his pet, then his payment would not be 3, but 10 times the trainer's standard rate. Xuan tried to calm the man's fiery mood, and Peng said that he would not need 10 times the payment. The guy said that this was his first job, and as a bonus, he would do everything at a pre-announced price. The man was perplexed how he could so confidently claim that he could heal the beast. Peng corrected him, saying that for the final verdict, he needed to see the pet to assess its condition. The exhausted man decided to trust the young guy and took out the carrying container in which his beast was located. Xuan gasped at the sight of the bleeding, trembling, pink lump in the man's hands. The pet's appearance made it clear that its condition was serious at the moment, and the man clarified whether Pan could cope with the healing of his beast. Pan carefully examined the data on the electric mouse in front of him, noting the line about minor injuries, before seeing another system window. A bright red notice warned of danger and that the beast needed to evolve as soon as possible. Pan immediately asked the man what he fed his pet, realizing that he felt bad because of it. The man admitted that he fed the mouse a jade bloody mushroom because he wanted his pet to evolve faster. Pan thought that right now the mouse was in the process of evolution, but due to the conflict between its nature and the element of thunder, it became ill. Using these systems, the guy immediately listed the ingredients needed for treatment, asking Xuan to bring everything from the warehouse. Peng reminded the man of the rules that the buyer of the trainer's services also takes on the cost of all consumables for the evolution of his pet. The guy promised the tormented beast that he would help him evolve. Seeing Peng's preparations for the evolution of the beast, Xuan and the man were horrified. They asked if the guy was sure that he was doing everything right. They were scared for their pet. Pan looked frankly intimidating, holding a pet in one hand and a carving knife in the other, but he was having fun at the same time. Seeing that Peng was throwing a mouse into a pot of boiling water, the man tried to stop what was happening, and Xuan was already calculating in her mind how much the eccentric trick of the young incompetent would cost their company. Peng, after stirring the contents of the pan, offered to try rat soup, which nourishes yin and tones yang, which made the man even more horrified. Seeing his reaction, Pan explained that he was just joking to defuse the situation and showed that everything was under control, and the man's pet was fine. The guy showed that the pan was not soup, but a medicinal bath for a pet, and that heating was needed to maintain the healing properties of the ingredients. The man silently tried to calm down while Pan continued to joke in his sophisticated manner. The man could only hope for a good result, thinking that there were only 2 famous and experienced trainers in their city, and their services cost incredible money. 10 minutes later, the man began to worry because the result was still not visible. Pan reassured him, saying that everything was almost ready and the pet should soon evolve. Just a couple of moments later, thick smoke suddenly poured out of the pan, causing the lid to jump to the side with a loud sound. At the bottom of the pan, already without the tincture of medicinal ingredients, the changed pet curled up into a ball. Having just woken up, the mouse immediately jumped out of the pan, began rushing around the office and causing destruction, thereby driving Juan into horror and into delight the man. The evolution was successfully completed, and the Thunder Mouse became an ideal class dual attribute bloody electric mouse that could become a commander in the future. The educated man immediately apologized to Peng for being suspicious of his abilities, appreciating the result with delight. Peng immediately gave the man a check with the price for the damage caused to the office and the services provided, without receiving any objections from the happy man. After receiving the payment, Peng asked Xuan to send him home the materials from the list prepared in advance, subtracting the cost from the salary received. The man, beaming with delight, turned to Pan, saying that he had another pet and that he would like to make another appointment with the guy for tomorrow. The man also said that the price is not a problem for him, and he will pay triple. Peng was even a little embarrassed to refuse him, but he explained that he would be busy with training classes the next day, having received from the man the assumption that these were courses from the association. But Peng objected to him, explaining that this was a normal third-year class in high school, and left, explaining that he still had homework to do. The man was amazed at the revealed truth. While Juan finally understood why Tang Tang had recently bought this expensive office and fired all the coaches, telling her to keep it secret from Gao Peng, the guy turned out to be not a stupid rich man. Tang Tang, meanwhile, was enjoying a glass of wine at home as she twirled a good-quality crystal core in her hands. Without thinking twice, the woman handed the core to the invisible beast behind her, ordering it to be taken home to Gao Peng. The pet got to the window of the guy's apartment and, making sure that no one noticed him, threw valuable material into the room. The fallen crystal was immediately discovered by Dazi, who was interested in the unusual object. Bu-chan wanted to stop the frivolous centipede, but it was too late. Datsu ate the throne crystal, which he immediately regretted. Gao Peng, walking home, dreamed that in the future he would be able to upgrade his pets to the epic class, when he suddenly heard a roar coming from the window of his apartment. He immediately ran home, realizing that something wrong had happened. Running into the apartment, Peng saw Dazi rolling on the floor, clearly feeling unwell. A system window that popped up in the air notified that evolution had been launched due to the absorption of the crystalline core, which greatly surprised Peng. He could not understand where and when his pet could absorb such an expensive material. Peng's suspicion immediately fell on a certain person, his aunt Tang Tang. From the woman's reaction, it was immediately clear that she was to blame for what happened. Peng became indignant that she fed the crystal core to Dazi without his knowledge, and asked why she did it. Tang Tang did not voice out loud that she did so because Peng would refuse her help, and quickly and awkwardly changed the topic of conversation. The aunt returned the bags of groceries to Peng, which he had left in the middle of the road when he realized that something had happened at home, and ran away before his nephew could say anything in response. The next moment, Peng slapped Dazi on the head and told him that the insatiable pet should no longer drag anything into his mouth, threatening him. Having come to terms with the situation, Peng pulled himself together. It was necessary to complete the evolution process as soon as possible. The guy found in his supplies a purple poisonous flower, which, when crushed, should help the evolution of Dazi. Pan crushed the found ingredient in a blender and poured the resulting liquid into the pet's mouth. The changes happened immediately. Dazi's body immediately shone with the golden light of lightning. His horns lengthened, and his eyes began to glow scarlet. The evolution was successfully completed, and a new, more advanced version of his pet appeared in front of Peng, a superior-grade purple thunder centipede. Datsu immediately fell down exhausted, tired of the torment he experienced before the evolution, disturbing the compassionate Bu-chan. To keep him from being sad, Pan treated him to a specially prepared treat. Bu-chan was worried when he realized that the food he was consuming was passing through his body and turning into embers, but Pan assured him that everything was fine and his body should stabilize soon. When Dazi woke up, both of his friends were already sound asleep, exhausted by the events of the day. Tang Tang, from behind the window, watched as the nimble centipede sat contentedly on Gao Peng's lap, covering the two of them with a blanket. At this wonderful moment, Peng did not know that big changes were soon awaiting him, discussed with the school principal. The gray-haired director actively objected to his interlocutor, emphasizing that there would never be a single monster on the territory of his school, since, first of all, in his opinion, one should worry about the safety of children. His interlocutor in military uniform reluctantly said that this is only true in peacetime, but if the situation worsens, young people will have to take up arms to defend the country. Hearing these words, the director became wary. He did not want to think about what his interlocutor had just said. But the man explained that, despite rapidly developing technologies, monsters in the wild are developing an order of magnitude faster. And if this continues, then someday people will not be able to resist them. When Peng came to school the next day, he was surprised by the amount of attention he received from his classmates crowded around him. One of the guys directly asked him if it was true that Peng had received an intermediate-level coaching certificate. The event was reported in the newspaper, stating that Peng became the youngest intermediate-level coach in the Chang'an City Association, breaking the previous record. Everyone started talking about how Peng is now a big celebrity, and their class is now the coolest. Because Peng studies with them, the words of his classmates made the guy blush from praise. Li Zigong, the classmate who had told everyone about Peng's success, took advantage of the moment to address him, embarrassedly saying that he had some presumptuous request. Contrary to everyone's expectations, Pan immediately refused him, explaining that since his request was presumptuous, it would be better not to voice it at all and not put them both in an awkward position. Li wanted to respond angrily to his rudeness, but the teacher entered the classroom, forcing everyone to go to their places with angry screams. She had an important announcement for the students. Standing at the table, the teacher announced that school life would no longer be the same, and that from today, high school students would have to study an additional subject on monsters, and the specialty of monster combat trainer would be added to the program. This project has been adopted by the Department of Education and the Armed Forces of the Alliance, and students with good academic performance and grades will have the opportunity to immediately enter the best colleges and military academies. Military trainers should soon arrive at the school, and students who have chosen the combat trainer specialty will begin training this afternoon, so those interested should have signed up immediately after school today. The class exploded with surprised, jubilant, and indignant exclamations about what caused such innovations, and that they now have the opportunity to study to become a combat trainer in high school. While everyone was busy discussing, the teacher asked Peng to come out of the office with her to talk. The teacher noted Gao Peng's recent success in obtaining an intermediate-level certificate, saying that the school principal praised him at the morning assembly and requested that he give a speech to the middle school students tomorrow as a representative. Without hesitation, Peng refused, asking to find someone else to play the role of the school representative, explaining his decision by saying that he did not like unnecessary attention. Without giving the teacher a chance to object, Peng enthusiastically shared his intention to apply to become a combat trainer. The teacher warned the high school student, saying that although a combat trainer is a good, highly paid profession, he should not rush forward so much. Good academic performance and a certificate as an intermediate-level trainer already opened up great prospects for the future for Peng. But within the framework of the specialty, the profession of a combat trainer was studied, and not an ordinary one, which was much more dangerous. Peng thanked her for her concern, but his goal was precisely the profession of a combat trainer. Peng thought that he did not want to know only theory, but in real combat conditions he had an excellent opportunity to learn much more and also become stronger. And since both exams could be taken at the same time, Peng was going to become an expert on both professions. The teacher chose not to dissuade him, saying that this was a dream that he was going to realize, and expressed the hope that Peng's decision was balanced and thoughtful. The high school student warmly thanked her for her trust. In the afternoon, a group of high school students gathered at the school to participate in the selection process for the specialty of military pet trainer. Among this self-confident crowd, there was also a familiar face. It was his classmate Li Zigong, who was wondering why Peng, with his excellent grades, would apply for a new specialty and receive the same question in response. Li justified his motivation by saying that his favorite anime as a child was Pokemon, and he now wants to become the most powerful trainer in the world. His fanatically naive approach did not inspire confidence at all. Tired of listening to his nonsense, Pan went towards the people crowded around the stage. He arrived just in time. The colonel was about to begin his speech. Someone from a crowd of school children said that there was nothing special about the big guy on stage, just a mountain of muscles. However, the flaming look of the man who heard him clearly said otherwise. Pan mentally noted to himself that the instructor is not as simple as he seems. The colonel began his speech by first praising everyone present for their courage to come today, but also indicated that this is not enough to become a coach. The man passionately, in an extremely rude manner, stated that without a strong mind and a steely will, even a trained monster would scare every sucker in here to the point of horror. The school children predictably began to be indignant that this statement was too rude and incorrect, as if they had never seen monsters in their lives. The colonel only grinned at this, realizing that words could not convey anything to them. Therefore, he presented to the public a real wild monster, brought with him for demonstration. The colonel ordered everything to be prepared for demonstration right now to one of his subordinates. The soldiers quickly prepared the necessary props, and one of them reported that the 10-centimeter thick armor plate had been successfully installed. Then the colonel approached the frightening-looking aggressive monster and gave the order to start. At that same second, he started and with lightning speed smashed the thick armor plate into small pieces. The already demonstrated spectacle had an effect on the previously prepared schoolchildren, making them realize how dangerous it is to deal with wild monsters. Even Pan was amazed by what he saw, because right before his eyes the monster was able to break such a thick piece of metal with just one blow. The colonel announced that monster combat trainers regularly encounter monsters of similar and even greater strength, and therefore he is giving those who change their mind a chance to leave right now. Pan watched as the ranks of applicants, of which there were quite a few, dwindled amazingly quickly, fearful. They looked extremely depressed and disappointed in their own cowardice, but the colonel encouraged them, saying that their decision was completely normal, their studies were also extremely important, and they made a smart choice in not becoming deserters. But he also addressed those who remained and stated that in their case, anyone who tried to leave would be considered a deserter, because he did not like those who give up halfway. By the end of the day, Pan, who returned home, was exhausted, although he was mentally prepared, but everything turned out to be much more serious than he thought. Colonel Chen also informed the students that in a month only 1,200 students from the entire city would remain, and the rest would be expelled. While he was pondering the situation, Pan decided to feed his pets, but to his surprise, the refrigerator was empty. Pan panicked. Not understanding where all the yin cedar needles could have gone, he searched the entire refrigerator but found only one single one. When Peng began to openly resent what was happening, Dazi immediately turned Buchan red-handed, saying that it was he who ate everything. Pan did not scold Buchan, realizing that this was his personal mistake, because he underestimated the monster's appetite. Now the food for both pets was built in accordance with the recommendations of the system, and Peng placed an order for the next portion of yin cedar needles for Buchan and thunderfigs for Dazi, thinking that such food was costing him a pretty penny. The more materials Pan provides to his pets, the faster they will move to the next stage of evolution, but there they will already need even rarer materials, and this was worth thinking about in the future. The very next morning, Peng had the opportunity to see a kind of zoo at the entrance to the school. Many students everywhere were trying to keep their pets on a leash while others were getting theirs out of trees, and this spoke louder than any words about their lack of training skills. One rather fragile-looking girl came with a pig-like monster the size of a small truck, and it seems she didn't know what to do with it. Pan turned to the girl, asking if it was her monster, to ask to clear the passage because the monster had completely blocked the main entrance to the school building. The girl felt awkward. She began to make excuses that when she bought the pet, it was very tiny, and she did not expect that it would grow up to be so huge. Seeing the pandemonium, one of the military trainers approached them, asking what happened and why the beast blocked the entrance. Having not heard an intelligible answer, the trainer gave an order to his animal, similar to the one that was present at the demonstration. The wolf immediately growled, looking aggressively at the pig several times his size. This had an effect. The huge pet trembled and recoiled, moving to the side and thereby clearing the passage. Once the problem was over, the coach informed them that their training was starting right away. The assembled students were lined up with their monsters, listening to the words of the trainer that today would begin training in Monster Command, a basic skill necessary to form a full-fledged monster squad in the future. A beast may be strong, but without obeying orders it becomes useless, as happened this morning. Before starting training, it is important to understand the monster's habits and preferences in order to build good relationships with him in the future. As an example, the trainer cited his wolf, whom he fed with his favorite black pork, played and slept with him every day, after which he became ready to obey any orders of the man. The trainer also said that breaking an armor plate with a blow of its tail, demonstrated earlier by the colonel's beast, is not a natural skill, but a skill developed during training. Due to the stress, its tail became stronger, and the beast eventually acquired an additional means of attack in addition to its claws and teeth. The trainer asked his comrade to demonstrate the skill of his silver wolf. The red-haired man explained that the development of animals of the same type can occur in different ways, and that during training each animal improves its strengths. He demonstrated this by throwing a stone, after which his wolf immediately rushed, catching him in flight and breaking him into crumbs with his bite. Both Peng and Dazi were amazed by what they saw. The strength of the beast's bite seemed incredible to them. The trainer continued to explain that there are currently 5 categories of monsters, including attacking, defending, supporting, healing, and controlling, with some monsters being a combination of these. One of these is the Vine, which can act as both a defense type and a control type, although experienced trainers can also develop it as an attack type. After the explanations, the students were asked to move on to practice, explaining that they need to start small, for example, use wood to train bite force, gradually increasing hardness. Those who decided on the category of their monster could register and take the necessary training materials. Peng was faced with the question of how best to train Dazi, and, remembering the study of the secret technique of transferring damage, he decided that he should focus on defense first. Pan also thought about the monkey monsters he had seen earlier, carrying large boxes of educational materials, managing despite their size. This gave him the idea of a mutant monster, a fierce fighting monkey which has a ferocious and aggressive disposition and therefore pays great attention to defense. From birth, the parents set an example for the cubs, forcing them to violently attack first trees and then rocks with the help of their bodies. This approach leads to injury, but the skin becomes stronger as it heals. Therefore, in adulthood, fighting monkeys have a muscular and tough body due to hardened calloused scars that form a kind of armor. Peng decided to use this approach to improve the defense of Dazi and selected training materials suitable for this. Returning to the training field, Peng informed Dazi that he had found an excellent way to train. Pulling out an auxiliary object from behind his back, Pan said that it was better to bleed to death now than to bleed in the future. With the statement that learning is hard, fighting is easy, Pan grabbed the sledgehammer with both hands, promising that he would try to be gentle. Frightened, Dazi immediately ran away, trying to escape from the torture destined for him. After this, Peng was forced to rush after the pet, explaining that this was all for his own good, until he managed to stop Dazi. At the end of the week, on a day off when there was no need to wake up early in the morning for training, Peng hoped to sleep longer, but was awakened by a loud knock. He still had to get up and go cook breakfast for his pets, despite the desire to sleep. While frying pancakes, Pan complained that he was helping his pets, but at the same time he was suffering the most, and this was unfair. However, all this was not in vain, because thanks to the additional nutrition, Dazi increased in size and successfully reached the 10th level, and Boo also received a promotion. But all this was not easy for Peng, because his hands were sore after training with Dazi, and almost his entire salary was spent on Boo's food. Boo noticed Pan's phone ringing on the table and answered immediately, allowing Pan not to be distracted from cooking. The caller introduced himself as the CEO of the Blue Shield security company named Woot Liu Sunlin. He asked for a meeting to discuss a certain proposal that should be beneficial to both of them. They decided to meet at the office where Peng currently works this afternoon. At the meeting, Mr. Liu introduced himself again. He was a pleasant-looking middle-aged man in an expensive-looking suit. He announced that he would like to offer Peng the position of trainer consultant in his company. Peng wondered why they turned to him. Because there were many other intermediate-level trainers in Chang'an City, he could not understand what made the director of a large company come to him. The man said that Peng was overly modest and underestimated himself. He recalled that there were only 2 established intermediate trainers in their city. One of them, Director Chen from the Trainers Association, was too busy to work in their small company. The other one, Shanlin, is number 1 in Chang'an and works for the government as a trainer consultant. When comparing Peng with other intermediate-level coaches, Director Li would prefer to trust the young and talented Gao Peng. After thinking, Peng decided first of all to put forward some mandatory conditions in the form of working only on weekends and refusing to sign a full-fledged contract, guaranteeing only a refusal to help the company's competitors. The director immediately agreed without any objection, handing a pre-prepared part-time contract for Peng to sign. Peng was extremely surprised when he read its contents, because it was a one-sided contract with no mandatory requirements for Peng, with an annual salary of 500 credits and a commission of 50 credits for each successful evolution of the beast. This offer turned out to be too good to even think about refusing, so P immediately signed his name, agreeing. Immediately after that, Xuan knocked on the door and entered, reporting that Mr. Ma came to the previously scheduled meeting. Director Li immediately collected himself, saying that since the contract was signed, he would not detain Mr. Gao any longer, and left the office. Taking the elevator downstairs, the man immediately made a call, informing his uncle that the contract had been signed, but he did not understand at all why, Out of all the intermediate-level trainers in the city, they chose Gao Peng. Meanwhile, Pan had already begun the reception in his office. He carefully examined the monster brought by a man he already knew. The cute and beautiful tree-class monster called the Flower Fairy was very beautiful and had a pleasant aroma. Peng asked if the man wanted to develop this fairy even with her current abilities. Ma told him that in 6 months, the Flower King tournament would be held in Chang'an City, and he would like to participate. Peng was shocked, because the man, possessing a flower-type monster, as rare as the undead, with amazing healing properties, was just going to take part in a beauty contest. Even Zhuan awkwardly asked whether girls usually participate in the Flower King competition, to which the man replied that this was true. But he always really wanted to participate, even if he was looked at very strangely when registering. Ma also said that the fairy is his second beast, so he wants to provide her with a happy future. The man persistently asked Pan to take care of the fairy's development so that she would have every chance to take first place. Peng was surprised by the strong concern for the beast, but promised that he would take care of it. Peng also did not fail to remind about the triple payment, upon hearing about which Xuan, with sparkling eyes, immediately brought an invoice for payment. Peng listed to the girl all the items that he needed for the evolution of the beast, and Xuan immediately and readily went to the warehouse to get them. After a short time, all the necessary materials were already on the table in Peng's office. After that, he kicked Xuan and Ma out the door, saying that they would interfere with his work. Despite this, the man still opened the door slightly to observe, despite Xuan's objections, because he was very worried about his baby fairy. Pan looked very intimidating, like a mad scientist, when he mixed the required composition and took it into the syringe. Mr. Ma almost attacked the guy when he was injecting his pet, but Xuan stopped him in time. Almost immediately after this, Peng allowed both of them to return back to the office. He imagined a monster that had evolved to the 4th level, becoming a flower begonia, which caused both of them to exclaim in admiration. Ma began to thank Peng from the bottom of his heart, despite his objections, because he was happy. While enjoying the result, none of them thought that at this very time one of the teams training to become combat trainers was fighting wild monsters. The 3 guys were endlessly indignant that their efforts were in vain, and looked forward to leaving only 1,200 people and returning them to their previous schooling. And only one girl was determined to continue, hoping to meet Gao Peng, the only student in her opinion worthy of respect. One day, Peng once again went to Chen Ji's store to buy yin cedar needles for Bu. To his surprise, the old man replied that they had run out, and instead of the required 30 pieces, only 10 remained. Pan didn't understand why this happened because outside the city there is a whole farm for their production, and the needles couldn't run out so easily. The old man then explained that the supply stopped a week ago due to spiders eating all the supplies with the yin attribute, which is why the entire farm area is now occupied by the army. Also, other monsters also became prey for the spiders, and if the farm owners had not escaped in time, they too could have gone to feed the horde of monsters. A voice was heard from the entrance to the store. It was another customer who came into the store, interrupting their dialogue. Mr. Chen suggested continuing their conversation another time, citing the fact that he was currently busy with work, to which Peng had to agree. On the way from the store, Pan began to think about a series of recent events. First, the school began to cooperate with the military. Then, a strange company invited him to cooperate. A new type of spider appeared. There was a feeling that something terrible was coming, which would be extremely difficult to resist. Just as he was thinking, Peng's phone rang. It was Li Songlin asking if Mr. Gao had heard about the infestation of devil spiders in the dark forest. After a short time, Peng was already near the first branch of the Blue Shield Company, greeted by Director Li. Immediately, the man began to bring him up to date, starting with the most important. Due to hordes of gray devil spiders attacking numerous resource points, the government gathered most of the companies and several private organizations to explore the dark coal forest to determine the habits and weaknesses of the monsters. Blue Shield Company just accepted the mission today and will leave in 3 days, but right now they don't have enough reserves, and so they need Peng to force the devil mantises to evolve before they leave to increase the chances of a successful completion of the mission. Peng immediately asked to be brought to the devil mantises to inspect their condition. Director Li, in turn, asked the guy to take the task responsibly, since it is very important for the company. At the previous alliance meeting, many of the bans suppressing unofficial forces were even lifted due to changes in wild monsters. As soon as they arrived, the director showed Gao Peng the hall, where all the devil mantises of the company were located. He also promised that enough people would be organized to help him. In addition, the man informed that if Peng completed the task, the reward would not disappoint him. This statement encouraged Peng, and he assured that he would cope with the designated work immediately starting execution. Director Lee watched his work progress from the observation floor, soon encountering a worker who approached him and wondered what Mr. Gao was doing there. He began to talk about how from the moment he started working, Pan did nothing but examine and touch monsters, like an old man in a grocery store. Besides, the guy looked to be about 20 years old, which inspired doubts about his abilities. But the director immediately stopped his reasoning, telling him to shut up. Otherwise, he would run into trouble. In fact, the director himself had doubts. But his uncle entrusted the future of the company into the hands of this child, and he could only believe in the justification of this decision. Having finished examining all the mantids, Peng listed a dozen mantids from different parts of the hall, as well as the materials he needed to provide for evolution. The director ordered that everything listed by the guy be brought immediately. The director was sincerely amazed by Pan's abilities, because in 10 minutes he was able to identify the 10 strongest monsters without making a single mistake. In the man's opinion, the skills demonstrated were not those of an intermediate-level coach at all, as Peng had done it faster and better than most of the top graduates being so young. Having received all the necessary materials, Peng immediately began work. Sometime later, the already dozing director was called out, notifying him that the work was completed. Everyone in the laboratory was incredibly happy, watching how the monsters evolved one after another in Pan's skillful hands. The employee who had previously expressed his doubts to the director, along with everyone else, showed his admiration for the young trainer, who had brought the monsters to the evolution into 4-winged jade devil mantises of the rank of superior class commander. Now Pan looked in the eyes of those around him not like an unpromising schoolboy, but like a real treasure. Later, Peng focused on his personal training with Dazi, and his pet showed increasingly good results. As a reward for his efforts, Pan treated the pet to his favorite dried insects. But against the backdrop of his personal victories, the laughter of other students suddenly sounded. Many of them became completely lazy and began to simply leave training without a twinge of conscience. And the teachers simply ignored this, helping those who were trying to achieve progress, which in general was a fairly logical decision, because people without an understanding of the discipline would hardly be able to fight effectively during hostilities in the future. Unexpectedly, a very tall girl named Mu Taiying approached Peng, saying that he was excellent at training his beast. The big difference in height greatly embarrassed Pan. He couldn't help but think that if she were a man, she would definitely be popular with girls, but out loud he only thanked her for the praise. The girl approached Pan to tell him that she would like to unite into one team. She explained that in the later stages of training there would be doubles matches with mandatory grading at the end, so she would like to team up with someone who is committed to training. The girl's words impressed Pan a little, but first he needed to evaluate her beast, which he reported. The girl immediately called her pet, and a huge iron rhinoceros ran up to them. Tyan shyly introduced the monster as her baby, patting her on her huge armored side. This sight shocked Peng and Dazi to the core, because the monster was simply huge. Also, before starting to cooperate, the girl warned that her pet, Lianzi, is very timid. Due to excessive timidity, they decided to focus on defense because Lianzi's character is not at all suitable for an attacking type, but she has tough skin and a high pain threshold. Peng carefully considered the proposal to unite them into one team. He saw many animals here, but almost all of them were of the ordinary class, and only a couple of dozen were excellent. And there were only 2 ideal ones, and one of them was the iron rhinoceros Tyan. After some thought, Peng came to the conclusion that if there was protection, Dazi could develop poisonous attacks and impressive speed, thanks to which an ideal duo could be formed, having both a sword and a shield in the team. While Peng was thinking, the girl decided that Peng was hesitant and did not want to cooperate, so she prepared to leave. Pan stopped her, saying that he agreed to cooperate and wanted to form a team. He said that character can be polished through training, and this is many times better than being on a team with slackers. The girl was incredibly happy when she heard his words, beaming with joy. She became extremely zealous in thanking Pan with 2 intense and strong handshakes to the point of discomfort. In the war zone in the dark forest, meanwhile, military detachments were gathering, preparing for battle. Director Lee greeted the blonde woman, Captain Song. Lee noted that based on recent research, gray devil spiders are very afraid of fire, which Captain Song's team is excellent at handling, which guarantees their success in this mission. She, in turn, noted that Director Lee's devilish mantises are considered forest killers, and this will help him complete the mission the fastest. Despite the exchange of pleasantries, their glances shot lightning at each other, betraying mutual hostility based on competition. One of the military men began a speech to the crowd, providing basic important information about the monsters that he had learned. It's likely that gray devil spiders hunt their prey in groups and then bring it back to their nest to ensure enough food for their mother, spawning a new, even more fearsome wave of spiders. Drawing attention to the importance of the mission, the man drew attention to the importance of cooperation, because upon successful completion, everyone will be generously rewarded. Many understood the military's fears about the possible internal struggle of civilian organizations and agreed that in this case it was necessary to work together. Having heard no objections, the man in uniform also added that, according to the agreement, the military would provide fire support, after which he launched the demonstration. Immediately, a series of shots from nearby tanks obediently rang out. Powerful volleys flew out, exploding in flames and leaving deep dents in the ground. Director Lee noticed that, after pretentious words about cooperation, the military suddenly decided to simply show off their weapons. But it was also worth noting that the government took this intelligence seriously, and the artillery pieces intended to provide cover significantly weakened the monsters, increasing the chances of a successful mission and reducing possible risks. Song was indignant that it was not for him to talk about the risks, having 8 commander-rank monsters with him, provided that in most organizations there are no more than 3 of them. Director Lee just laughed with superiority, answering out loud that most people hide their trump cards, and their company is too honest for such a farce. Suddenly, a deafening sound of unknown origin was heard, causing everyone in the military operation to panic. One of the trainers noted that the devil mantises were behaving strangely, as if they were afraid of something. A moment later, something terrifying appeared from behind the treetops. It was an ape-like monster, engulfed in flames, as tall as a multi-story building with a burning gaze. Director Lee exclaimed in shock as he recognized the monster. It was Halo, a Lord-level monster. This very monster was the guardian of the dark, pleasant forest in which they were all now. The gigantic monster began to go on a rampage, frightening all the gathered people with its roar, causing them to panic. The commander-in-chief tried to bring them to their senses and force them to follow orders instead of causing panic. But all his efforts were in vain, and suddenly, at the peak of hopelessness, another monster appeared in the sky. It was a proud eagle, shining with golden light. Equal in size to the enemy, it instilled hope in the souls of people who recognized it. The eagle gave a worthy rebuff to the ruler of the forest and completely consumed his fire. The defeated enemy walked away, giving peace to the people below, saved by the eagle. While the others were recovering from the shock of what had happened, the military commander emphasized the need to complete the mission as soon as possible, because at this stage they would no longer be able to provide military support. Suddenly, a voice was heard commanding the formation and announcing the arrival of an elite military detachment. The commander-in-chief immediately became embarrassed, beginning to say that his detachment would have managed it anyway. But the commander of the arriving elite military detachment objected that the situation began to become more difficult and unpredictable, defying all forecasts. So the unification of the forces of the government and organizations was extremely necessary. Sometime later, they organized the work again, and the troops moved into the spider cave. Captain Song's squad successfully advanced thanks to the strength of the fire-type monsters, killing the spiders one by one along the further path. But one of the girls objected that this cannot continue, and they are wasting their energy in vain, because despite the effectiveness, there are more and more spiders, and this will soon lead to exhaustion. Listening to the girl's words, the leader ordered a change in formation, pushing the defensive animals into the first row and the support into the center of the line, leaving the flanks for the attacking type animals, and they continued to move with a focus on close combat. This tactic made the expenditure of energy more efficient in real combat conditions, and the spiders began to be exterminated one by one. The coaches were delighted with how effective their new tactics were. Moving deeper into the cave, the girls heard the sounds of many footsteps. The sound came from one of the passages, which perhaps meant that the place they needed was close. Captain Song, after expressing this assumption, gave the command to her squad to go to the source of the sound. Coming out of the stone passage, they saw far below the picture of the battle that opened before them. These were detachments of the companies with which they collaborated, and the military, waging a battle with the monster. At the moment, they concentrated all their forces on breaking through the Spider Queen, which had a weak attack, despite its size, because its main task was reproduction. Director Lee asked to trust him, and ordered the back row to aim for the eyes of the uterus, and the rest to continue to attack the legs, saying that this way they would definitely win and share the reward fairly for everyone's merits. The soldiers accepted his command without objection and began to follow the assigned tactics. Further, all the blows were calculated for pure force, because the armor in front of them was very dense. Captain Song's subordinates began to talk about the need to go down and help the others. Otherwise, in the future, the military could cancel their contribution to the mission. Captain Song agreed that she couldn't just sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight, but she had a bad feeling, as if something was wrong with this monster. The joint attacks of the fighters finally yielded results, and the protection around the eyes of the spider's uterus was broken. It was necessary to continue the fight. The dark mantises began to strike directly at the monster, wounding it in the head with great force, and this became a fatal mistake. The wounded monster went berserk and roared, causing the squad to fall from the heartbreaking sound at that very moment. No one remembered who exactly said that the Spider Queen had no attacking abilities, but it was obvious that this person had greatly miscalculated, exposing everyone who was now in the cave. Hearing about this, Director Lee suddenly saw something strange, a golden light surrounding the monster, which was the ruler's halo, which caused the man to panic unaccountably. The director immediately jumped on one of the mantises and, shouting that they had interrupted the process of evolution of a monster at the peak of the rank of commander, ordered everyone to escape from the cave as quickly as possible if they wanted to stay alive. The military, who remained outside waiting for the squad to return from the mission, began to worry that the squad had not returned for more than 3 hours. But they were allocated 5 hours for the mission, so it was too early to panic. But one of them suddenly saw a shadow towering over the forest, glad that someone had returned, which means the mission should already be completed. However, the commander immediately noticed something strange in the fact that there was only one approaching object. He instantly commanded his subordinates to prepare for battle, preparing for the worst. Director Lee, riding a praying mantis, began waving his hand and shouting that he belonged so that they would not shoot at him. As soon as the mantis landed, the man immediately fell to the ground. His legs could not support him at all, and one of the soldiers ran closer, asking what happened and where everyone else was. The director suddenly grabbed the soldier by the tie, indignant that the government sent their teams to the slaughter to fight the Spider Queen at the peak of the commander's rank. He was furious at the situation. The commander approached them and asked them to calm down in order to explain properly what happened. The director reluctantly released the soldier and, having calmed down, explained that while exploring the cave, they met a Spider Queen and attacked it. But it turned out to be in the process of evolving to the rank of Lord, and even the best monsters of the squad could not cope with it. The commander addressed the group of people with him, outraged that their government research had given false information about the queen spider having no fighting power. Another figure suddenly came out of the forest. This man turned out to be the head of a special military detachment, who was also overtaken in the cave. The commander immediately asked him about the situation, where was the queen spider, and whether they were chasing him, to which the man replied that the spiders had chased the rest of those who had escaped, who scattered in different directions and disappeared into the forest. After that, everyone broke into groups, discussing what happened and deciding what to do next. The commander said that if he had known about the real state of affairs, he would have sent more people and artillery. If it had been possible to capture the Spider Queen and train it properly in the military zone, it would have significantly strengthened the military district. But now it was completely useless. That's what worried the commander, unlike the director, who was worried about the fallen people. But now the commander did not see a problem in the existence of the Spider Queen in the forest, considering her only garbage, because just as two tigers cannot get along on the same mountain, the ruler of the dark forest will not allow her to live. Meanwhile, Peng observed the result of Da Zi's training, who smashed another obstacle to pieces, amazing other students and their pets with his skills. Seeing such fantastic results, high school students who did not understand the essence of coaching simply shouted at their students, telling them to follow the example of the cool centipede. In Pan's head, satisfied with the work he had done, was the story of Director Lee, who, on a government mission, met a monster at the peak of the rank of commander and one rank of lord, which was quite dangerous. He also thought that the body of a general class monster is worthless, while an epic class would be enough to buy good materials, so he should strengthen Bu and Da Zi to lord rank as quickly as possible to increase their power in the wild. Promoting monsters will increase Peng's reputation as a trainer, in which case it is worth going to Yanjing City to get an advanced monster trainer license and expand your capabilities. Bu has already reached the 14th level, but, unfortunately, buying yin cedar needles anywhere is not yet possible, and the supplies at home are exhausted, and now Boo sits near the refrigerator all the time and looks at it sadly. Daza also progressed a lot, reaching the 13th level. Pan was distracted from his thoughts by Taiying approaching. She brought Pan notes that she had taken during the training and development of her pet Lianzi. Peng decided that since they were teaming up, he should find out more about the protective abilities of the girl's beast, and her notes would help develop the ideal tactics for development and combat, as well as learn about her character. After looking at some funny comments among the notes, Pan laughed a little but realized that Taiying was extremely serious. A voice was heard from the speakers located around the training field, announcing the need to gather in front of the podium and the cancellation of free practice. The trainer who met them announced that the first stage of training was over, and before the start of the next stage, some conclusions would be announced. And the coach began to mercilessly call the names of the students one after another, saying that each of them was disqualified, despite the dissatisfied screams and exclamations of the students. The coach clearly explained that during the training, each inspector monitored the students all this time, and the successes of each of them were noticed, as well as their absence. Special mention was made of a guy who was on his phone instead of working out, and a girl who fell asleep during one of the classes, which was simply incomprehensible. The coach concluded that these students would return to their previous classes starting tomorrow, because if they were so lazy even in basic training, then there was no point in continuing their training as a combat trainer. The remaining students move on to the next stage of training, real combat, during which an absent-minded state can lead to accidents, and in a real battle to death. The students were shocked by his words. Not all of them understood what exactly real combat training was like, and not everyone present was confident in their abilities. However, there were also those who turned out to be extremely self-confident about their abilities, first starting to show off their pets, exaggerating their merits, and then finding out among themselves who is better and why. The coach, meanwhile, said that there would be 5 people in each group and an instructor would take care of each group, so we need to unite. The 2 biggest debaters immediately declared that they would be on Gao Peng's team and began to drive away the other students, putting Peng and Taiying in an awkward position. And only after, when the students began to disperse to other teams, 2 guys deigned to tell Pan that they had long wanted to team up with him, causing him to laugh nervously. The chief instructor, the one who made all the important statements and controlled the training process in general, approached their team. He formally introduced himself, saying that his name was Zhang Baron, and that he would be in charge of their group's practical training, with a friendly and inviting smile. But it was felt that he was not as simple as he seemed. The next morning, Boo continued to look at the refrigerator with a sad look. He opened and closed the drawer over and over again, apparently hoping that the yin cedar needles would somehow magically appear there. Pan told him that it doesn't work that way and began to watch Boo, because he was very cute and stupid in his demeanor. The guy was only able to be pulled away from this spectacle by a phone call. It was from the Hunters Association. The information provided by the employee was very pleasing, because Peng's order, yin cedar needles, was finally delivered. He only needed to pick up the package from the courier. Peng immediately put on his shoes and left the house, hurrying to get the long-awaited order, which had not been on the market for a long time, which is why Peng even thought about changing Boo's evolution strategy. Leaving the house, the guy immediately met a robot courier who delivered the order. Meanwhile, they were watched by several figures from a dark corner, discussing Pan's rather expensive purchase. These were 3 men who followed the robot from the association itself. Their intentions regarding this were not at all pure, as evidenced by the evil grins on their faces. One of them became nervous, asking what would happen if someone found out about their misdeed. But the other man immediately turned him down, saying that only the strongest survive in this world, and hit him on the head to vent his irritation. The 3 of them set out to carry out the plan late at night. They sneaked along the street, discussing whether a rich man could live in such a squalid area as the one with which they are now located. Their proclaimed boss said that this would benefit them, suggesting that the guy had become rich only recently, having previously lived here and not having much income. Already at the entrance, having reached the desired door, they began in a great hurry to try to quietly pick the lock in order to get into the apartment. They were not quiet enough and the door opposite suddenly opened, illuminating the corridor with light. The one who came out of her apartment was Tang Tang. The woman yawned sweetly and asked the men what they were doing here in the middle of the night. They began to very much apologize for the noise and awkwardly make excuses that the light in the entrance did not work, and therefore they could not open the apartment. Tang Tang yawned again and, having accepted such explanations, prepared to return to her room. Suddenly, the closing door was stopped by someone's hand. It was the leader of the gang who asked to let them drink water, making the excuse that his throat was dry. Tang Tang trustingly responded to his request and invited the men to her house. They looked at each other disgustingly, chuckling. Dark thoughts clouded their minds. They thanked and began to ingratiate themselves, asking how they could respond to the woman's kindness. As soon as all three of them entered the room, one of the men slammed the door and turned the lock. Tang Tang asked why he did this after noticing the man's strange actions. In response, he rubbed his palms disgustingly and told her that he would not want to disturb the neighbors at this late hour. What he did not expect was the woman's words that his worries were in vain, because the walls were covered with a special soundproofing material, and even a game of dodgeball would not disturb the neighbors. The next thing the men saw horrified them, making them tremble in fear. Behind the woman from the ceiling, an unusual-looking lizard-like monster with a light blue translucent body began to look at them, and a frightening aura of anger began to emanate from the woman. All three were very frightened by this change, feeling trapped. Then the gang leader pulled out a hidden knife and jumped on the woman, intending to defeat her faster than she started doing anything. He was very angry and scared at the same time. But to his surprise, the knife simply flew out of his hands when Tang Tang parried the blow. Moreover, the man's arm was in great pain, and he was crouched on the floor while the domineering Tang towered over him, looking at him like he was a non-entity. Seeing this picture, the other two also decided to act in revenge for the boss, also involving the captured monster, a small porcupine. The beast jumped from its owner's hands with the intention of attacking, but was grabbed by a monster much larger than itself. Tang Tang's pet instantly swallowed the threat, looking down on the frightened non-entities. The woman patted her pet on the head, expressing her approval of the monster's actions, but complained that he was again eating everything indiscriminately. But Tang Tang didn't expect that these three had another monster, and was attacked by a series of golden bullets. The man was pleased with the attack carried out by his pet and mocked, believing that the arrogant woman was struck down. But imagine his surprise when he saw that in place of the torn nightie, perfectly smooth milky skin was visible without a single damage. The man exclaimed in amazement at the sight of this spectacle and was frightened, because now Tan was really angry. Her gaze screamed that now he would not get out of here alive. Now the men were fully aware that it was not they who locked her up and made her a victim. On the contrary, Tan was the main monster in this apartment. Pan tossed and turned in his room, hearing echoes of heart-rending screams and wondering who couldn't sleep that night. Tan, having had enough of her revenge on this gang, was distracted by a phone call from her father. He needed people right now, and the woman gladly gave the beaten and tied-up men under his responsibility. At school training the next morning, it was not easy. Dazi was completely exhausted when faced with a new opponent. Peng was also puzzled by the fact that after many trainings, Dazi could not penetrate someone's armor, and the rest of his teammates were even more amazed at what they saw, because they believed that Peng and his beast could do anything. The tardigrade monster seemed to have impenetrable protection. In addition to the standard summary of characteristics, the system separately highlighted a window with the characteristics of the monster, which had never happened before. Pan even thought about making the tardigrade his third pet. Tardigrades had surprisingly high survivability. They could even survive in space. When exposed to radiation chemistry and at temperatures of more than 200 degrees or below zero, their defense was also quite strong against anomalous attributes. However, even with all the incredible properties, it was not clear how the tardigrade could work in the same team with Bu and Dazi. Peng would prefer to find a monster that could fly or heal. Pan was distracted from his thoughts by a loud sound coming from the direction of the training field. Lianzi, Tian's armored rhinoceros, had just been able to defeat her opponent, and the girl was actively praising her for her work. Peng noticed that Lianzi had become much bolder during training than before. Pan was distracted from observing his successful training by the ringing of his phone in his trouser pocket. The caller turned out to be Director Li, asking if Peng had a free minute today. The man said that he would like to invite Peng to dinner with his friends and introduce them to the guy. The director spoke extremely politely, leaving Peng a little bewildered. The guy suggested that this was due to a recent incident due to which the company suffered greatly. Peng understood that the development of the company at the moment was quite dependent on him, so he agreed to the director's proposal, asking him to pick him up after school. Already in the evening at the meeting, Peng apologized for the disturbance, since it was he who asked to pick him up. But Director Li assured that there was nothing wrong with it, and in any case, he was going to pick up his daughter, who studies with the guy, after school today. The girl, in turn, was indignant that the man came to pick her up at school for only the second time this year, and the first time was on the first day of school, thus indicating that the director is not completely honest now. The director just laughed awkwardly and turned to Peng with a request to help Zhao Yu, his daughter, with her beast. Pan turned to the girl, examining and appraising the beast in her arms, and found it quite interesting, because familiar cats are very rare. Therefore, he agreed, saying that he was in the workshop every weekend and the girl could come by. They arrived at the director's house and he asked his daughter to leave, because he and Pan needed to go further on their business, which the girl already understood perfectly well from the very beginning. After leaving, she said goodbye contentedly until her next meeting with Gao Peng, her classmate. Pan didn't understand why the director was sending his daughter home if they were just going to see the man's friends, and so he decided to clarify who they were. The director did not answer his question, only saying that Pan would know when they arrived. Already there, Peng looked at the luxurious landscape near the restaurant, made in the southern style and similar to a converted villa in the mountains, thinking that the director's friends were clearly not so simple. Entering the pre-booked private room, the director introduced Peng to the other guests. Song, the woman who is the captain of the Firefly Hunters, returned the greeting in a friendly manner. But Captain Jianggu from the team of Heavenly Star Hunters immediately expressed his disappointment because Li described Mr. Gao as so mysterious and cool, but he brought only a schoolboy. Pan did not appreciate such a comment in his direction, looking around those present and realizing that representatives of teams of monster hunters had gathered here, which could not be a coincidence at all. They all looked down on Pan and with obvious distrust, which was terribly unpleasant. The director tried to smooth out the situation by offering everyone present something to eat. But Jianggu was extremely hostile. He didn't like Gao Peng's expression and asked if they had upset the guy. Song told him that Peng was just a child, and he shouldn't treat students like that. Such behavior should be shameful for him. Li got into their argument by saying that he did not warn Pan about who the meeting would be with, and did not even think about such an outcome. Jianggu turned to Peng, saying that he had been hearing rumors about Mr. Gao for a long time, but had not been able to arrange a meeting with him and get to know him in person. The others supported him, inviting Pan to the table and wanting to take the opportunity to ask the young man's advice while they were drinking, thereby causing confusion in the guy. Director Li apologized out of politeness, handing Peng a glass of wine. Peng felt extremely uncomfortable. He was like a valuable commodity with much more value than the remuneration he received from the director. The guy didn't like this situation at all, but he had to play by the rules set by his interlocutors. After some time, Jianggu turned to Gao, and stating that he was an extremely straightforward and vulgar person, drew attention to the fact that Peng was very young, but was rumored to have excellent abilities, so I would like to ask him a few questions. After all, Jianggu has long reached a high rank in this matter, but he has already heard a lot about Peng, and some are talking about the guy as a real legend. Peng replied that, in this case, it was not him who should be praised, but the examiner Feng, and that if the man had any questions, it would be better to come to the company. The man openly called his answer rude, saying that his friend's friend is also his friend, and friends are needed for mutual assistance, so there is no need to involve the company in this. The others also agreed with his arguments, starting to reproach Pan for considering himself superior to others and brazenly asking for help for personal problems. Pan was extremely outraged by this behavior. This was the last straw before his patience ran out. He had had enough of the contempt of others for today. He left, telling respected commanders that he was just a high school student, a rookie with a lack of experience. Director Li began to apologize for everything that happened and said that he would personally take Peng home, but he refused. Peng called a taxi in advance and did not need the director's help to get home. When Peng left, the others voiced their dissatisfaction, saying that Peng really didn't know anything and was just a joke. The director responded by saying that he had been very kind to all of them, but today they disappointed him. As soon as all the guests returned to the premises, Jianggu, who had remained with Li on the street, said that today he had only returned a small favor to him, provoking the guy at his request, assuring that no one would find out from him about what had happened. Director Li laughed, saying that there was no need to say that because they were just friends helping each other. But Jianggu did not appreciate his words, answering that he did a mutual kindness, and now they are even. As he left, the man wondered why Gao Peng was helping the director so much if he was jumping out of his pants so that others would like him so much. As a result, Pan arrived home when it was already quite dark. Taking off his shirt, the guy turned on the TV to distract himself a little. The news reported strong side effects from the genome enhancement serum. After its introduction to the familiar, many cases of the appearance of malignant mutations were recorded, as confirmation of which display a rather unpleasant picture of a crippled monster on the screen. Due to unpredictable symptoms, It was recommended to abandon the serum, and it was also planned to stop selling it worldwide. While watching the news, Gao Peng's phone rang. It was Director Li again. Reluctantly, Peng answered the call, asking if the director wanted anything. The man apologized for ruining the evening, justifying that he should have warned about who the meeting would be with, but could not even imagine that those present would behave so ill-mannered. Pan chose for the best to lie that he was not angry about the current situation, thereby intending to put an end to the conversation. However, Director Li continued, telling him not to worry because those who wronged Gao Peng also wronged Li himself. But Pan chose not to listen to his ranting anymore and simply ended the call. Pan was very angry because those people were not to blame for thinking he was naive. However, organizing a circus to make him look like an idiot was too much. So Pang came to the idea that he should be more attentive and begin to build up his strength and authority. Meanwhile, the following events continued to flash on the news. 21-year-old Han Ning won the championship and received the title of the first Dog King of Yangchen. This young man was able to develop his beast to the rank of an ideal class commander in 3 years, and he was dubbed the best among the youth. But Peng decided for himself that this would not last long. The very next day, Pan came to his office with Boo and mixed the final composition, giving the pet a new portion of the medicine for evolution. Meanwhile, 3 girls were heading towards his studio, one of whom was the director's daughter. Along the way, they fooled around, discussing Pan and making fun of each other. Already on the spot, Secretary Xuan met them, kindly clarifying whether the girls had a meeting for 3 with Gao Peng. The girls immediately began to clarify in confusion whether it was necessary to sign up in advance and say that they did not know about it, to which Xuan suggested that they clarify now, when Peng would generally be free. Zhao Yu thought about the fact that her father had previously called Gao Peng a genius. But the downside is that with a high level, the price for his services is probably quite high, but because of this, perhaps there are few clients. All thoughts suddenly disappeared when a deafening roar was heard from the workshop. This sound gave me goosebumps, making my heartbeat difficult and forgetting how to breathe. Meanwhile, Boo in the workshop has already shown the world his new look. The monster finally evolved into an epic grade bone monkey, making Pan incredibly happy. Also, after his promotion, Boo unexpectedly acquired a new powerful ability. The Heart of Bloody Threads increased all of Boo's characteristics and could also control the beating of other people's hearts. Pan was very happy about this, because thanks to this ability, Boo's combat power would become much greater. However, now there was a problem of a different kind. Boo's size had become too large, and moving along the street with him would become much more difficult. Peng came out of the workshop and asked Xuan to find something to cover Boo, so that he would be less noticeable. But she was too amazed that in such a short time Peng was able to increase the familiar to epic rank. Zhao Yu, who noticed the guy, greeted him, calling him Uncle Gao, who recognized her as Director Li's daughter. Peng realized that the old fox was afraid that Peng would not make contact, so he was using his daughter. But more than that, Pan was interested in the familiar of the girl's friend. Obviously, in the new conditions, the jellyfish mistook the air for the sea and adapted. A very interesting solution. Zhao Yu turned to Uncle Gao, asking him to examine her familiar. But the guy asked to stop calling him that. It was too unusual, especially considering that they were the same age. Further, Pan explained in the usual manner the algorithm of work, that first there is payment for the service, which for her familiar, an elite mint cat, should cost 60 credits. He decided that there was no point in being biased towards the girl, because she does not know about the machinations of her father. Therefore, Peng said that for the sake of Director Li, Zhao Yu's father, he would pay for the materials himself, for which the girl was immensely grateful to him. And then, not seeing the pet, he asked where he was, to which the girl was confused and began to look around in a daze, not understanding where he could have gone. Her friend reported that the cat was hiding in the corner, most likely scared of the bone monkey, which was true. Noticing that the owner was looking for him, the cat immediately rushed into her arms in tears, in search of protection and consolation. Zhao Yu happily consoled him, saying that there was nothing to worry about. Pan, meanwhile, asked the owner of the jellyfish, familiar where she bought it. He had never seen anything like it before, and he became interested. The girl explained that in fact this jellyfish is just a pet that she uses as a wallet, because they can send anything into subspace. She demonstrated the pet's abilities by handing him a phone that instantly disappeared. The girl also added that floating jellyfish are a specialty of Pengchen City, and recently they have been sold in large quantities on Wugu Shopping Street. What she said interested Pan even more. The spatial beast seemed like something quite useful, That is why Peng went to the place indicated by the girl at the first opportunity. Jellyfish were actually sold here. They interested and delighted passers-by with their appearance, inviting them to buy. Pan immediately asked the seller to show him the floating jellyfish, to which he instantly showed him one of the presented ones. However, this is not exactly what Peng had in mind, and explained to the seller that he wanted to see all the jellyfish so that he could choose himself. Pan, at his request, was led to the warehouse to the aquarium, where all the available jellyfish were displayed. The database kindly explained that floating jellyfish evolved from ordinary sea jellyfish and were modified by the effects of cosmic energy, settling and thriving in their territory. However, being victims of predatory animals, they almost became extinct. Peng remarked that they were probably the most pathetic dimensional beast species, to which the seller replied that they really didn't have any skills other than levitation and dimensional pocketing. Pan began to look at the available monsters and noticed that they were all not much different from ordinary jellyfish. However, one jellyfish clearly stood out, different from all the others. It strangely looked hyperactive. Pan said that he wanted to buy this particular jellyfish among all the others. The seller highlighted its selectivity, saying that it was a rare mutated species of floating jellyfish, an ideal class floating jellyfish king with speed ability worth 100 credits. Pan noticed that what he said was absolute nonsense and set a price of 50 credits. The seller immediately happily agreed. It became very obvious that even this price was quite high. And yet Peng still won, because he saw the real characteristics. This hyperactive jellyfish had 2 attributes and an advanced class. Peng had already seen what kind of team of pets he would make. While the jellyfish was tied up so that it would not fly away, it resembled a balloon, which Peng directly stated, giving her the appropriate name Chunba. Arriving home, Peng immediately introduced the new family member to Dazi, to which he showed a far from happy reaction. The pet ran away into another room with dissatisfaction, slamming the door. Pan didn't understand his reaction, but made the assumption that he was jealous. However, this was not the reaction Pan expected, and he did not like it. Peng immediately played his trump cards. Knowing his familiar very well, he began to talk about specially purchased dried insects and poisonous swordworms, so dearly loved by Dazi, as well as expensive materials for level advancement. Succumbed to these sweet words, Dazi quickly came out of his hiding place, salivating from the description of his favorite treats, especially for him. But instead of the promised goodies, Dazi received only a scolding for his ugly behavior. While the two were making out, Bu and Chunba were quietly interacting with each other, seeming to have found a common language with each other. Peng took revenge on Dazi for disobedience and bickering, and with a sense of accomplishment, returned to Chunba. Pan intended to conclude a contract with the jellyfish right now, because while his level was not so high, it would be easy to do this, which he was going to take advantage of. Medusa seemed frightened by his actions, not understanding what the guy was going to do. Peng, meanwhile, examined Chunba's mind space, which was smaller than Dazi's, but at the same time more timid and restless, and his mind was still too unstable. In the end, Peng decided for himself that if he signed a contract right now, he would feel like a kidnapper of a child. So he decided to put it aside and for now start spending more time with Chunba so that he began to trust him. Peng thought the best solution for this would be to take Chunba with him to school tomorrow. When they met, Mu reacted rather strangely to him. She seemed puzzled. And not only Mu, all the other students also did not understand what had happened, believing that for some reason Peng put an extremely ugly hat on his head. However, the hat was actually Chunba, his new pet, as he demonstrated by retrieving a bottle of water from subspace. Peng explained to Mu that this was a floating jellyfish, an animal with spatial abilities. The girl said that she had heard about them but quickly changed the topic to the upcoming training match, asking if Pan had already seen their today's opponent. Peng shared his thoughts that the purple scorpion really looks threatening and it looks like it won't be an easy fight. Mu asked whether Peng would fight first today, as usual. From the side, there were whispers from other students that it seemed that the points for the first victory of the day would again go to Gao Peng today. This was not the first time this happened. So Peng decided that this time he would give in to others, which he openly stated in front of other students. Many were scared, but one of the students was happy about this turn of events and decided to take advantage of the chance by asking to speak first. Peng was wary because this disciple had a rooster dragon familiar, which was the only advanced class monster here, not counting Dazi, that could give a decent fight to the purple scorpion. Peng wanted to clarify whether Dazi was prepared to carefully observe this fight, when he noticed that his familiar was looking in a completely different direction, drooling profusely at possible prey. The guy immediately returned the pet to reality, reminding him of the importance of observing the upcoming enemy. The instructor waved a red flag, signaling the start of the fight. The purple scorpion and dragon rooster immediately gathered, capturing everyone's attention and ready to start fighting at any moment. The dragon rooster decided to attack first, soaring into the sky to strike the enemy from above. However, due to carelessness, Thoth was grabbed by the scorpion's claw after a failed attack. The instructor told the owner of the dragon rooster that he could be glad that the scorpion had no poison. Otherwise, his familiar would already be dead after being hit by the sting. In addition, the rooster dragon is strong enough that the scorpion can only pierce a muscle with its sting, and a hit to the pectoral muscles is not so fatal as to cause much damage. After this, the dragon rooster pecked his opponent with impressive force. His master was already rejoicing in victory, exulting after the seemingly devastating attack. However, Pan saw much more and understood that this was not the end of the battle. After the merciless attack of the rooster dragon, the purple scorpion struck back with a serious blow, which became fatal. The dirty but victorious move completely broke the rooster dragon, forcing him to shed a tear. Many students even unwittingly felt his pain, sympathizing with the monster. At this point, the instructor decided to stop the fight, because the further outcome was obvious. The rooster dragon immediately ran away in tears because in this battle his pride was trampled. The instructor asked if there were any more volunteers to challenge the purple scorpion. Also, the instructor noted out loud that previously the purple thunder centipede had always opened the battle, but some were unhappy with this, underestimating the enemy. Now the students had no objections. They themselves suggested that those with higher grades should move forward. The instructor turned to Peng, asking his opinion on this matter. Peng did not refuse, again taking the first battle on himself and Dazi. As soon as Dazi crawled into the cage and took a fighting stance, the fight began. Mu asked Pan's opinion about the upcoming battle, because the purple scorpion had demonstrated overwhelming power, with which the guy mentally agreed, at the same time deciding that the monster's weakness probably lay in its clumsiness. However, right now, even though he was very nervous, Peng could only believe in Dazi and his victory. The first attack of the scorpion was strong and swift, however, Dazi quickly dodged it, avoiding serious injury. Mu commented approvingly of his actions while Peng stood with an impassive face. Having missed one of the attacks, which did not cause much damage, the centipede attacked with its tail in a sweeping manner, forcing the scorpion to fly to the side. The next, rather strong, blow again hit the purple scorpion. Peng's teammates cheered as they watched Dazi gain the upper hand. After that, Dazi grabbed the scorpion, causing serious injury, and it could no longer move. The fight came to an end, leaving victory for the centipede. Peng and Chun Ba cheered, supporting Dazi's victory, very proud of him. After the battle, Mu was delighted with Peng's stamina and endurance because, according to her, he didn't even raise an eyebrow despite the fact that Dazi was in such danger. Pan pretended that this was the plan, but in fact he was so nervous and worried about his pet that he even began to sweat. The instructor, meanwhile, drew Peng's attention to himself, asking him to calm down Dazi. The man complained that they didn't have many monsters to train on, so they couldn't let the centipede eat the scorpion it had defeated. Daza, meanwhile, enjoyed his prey, methodically tearing off a piece of the flesh of the defeated enemy, drenched in a bright green liquid that served him as something like blood. Seeing this sight, the disciples began to whisper again, worrying that Dazi, judging by his wild behavior, was not completely tamed, which means that everyone who is here could be in great danger. But following the instructions of the instructor, Peng called Dazi to him despite the latter's extreme dissatisfaction. The centipede immediately ran to its owner past the crowd that parted in front of him out of fear. Peng took a handkerchief from his pocket and immediately began to wipe his pet, together with Chunba, who was helping him in this matter, saying that he should not eat anything and scare those around him, especially since dried insects are much tastier and more nutritious. There were also dissatisfied people with these words and began to be indignant that no one had scared them, and Peng was too arrogant. Mu advised Peng not to worry about this, saying that this little thing was simply afraid of Dazi's incredible power. Pan, in turn, noticed that now they were all fighting monsters in cages, under the protection of instructors and silver moonwolves. He addressed the students, asking what would happen when they encountered monsters in the wild. The rest began to actively resent his statement that with such thinking one should not become combat trainers if life is precious. The brewing argument was interrupted by the instructor with just one clap of his hands, saying that Pan was right. He also said that while everyone is gathered, important information needs to be conveyed because everyone here has completed the basic training course and starting tomorrow, they can apply to be sent to the training base. Already there, everyone will be trained during the week for which the school has approved study leave for the participants. Many were delighted that after so much training, the time had finally come for real battles, while others were worried, considering themselves insufficiently prepared. Peng considered being in an unknown territory training base to be a great opportunity. Some people had a question about payment because not everyone could immediately make a contribution of 5 credits, especially since nothing had been said about this before. The instructor replied that in this case you could refuse the trip or go to a private field training base in the wild. Even then, many agreed that 5 credits was a very favorable price because going to a private area usually costs from 20 credits for a week, and that's just for the entrance, and you also need props and equipment. It was also possible to sign a contract with the military alliance to serve for the next 8 years after school, in which case they would cover all the costs of training. Thus, thanks to the ability to choose average pay or sign a contract, the army gained its power, which was quite smart. The instructor also warned that when registering to participate, death insurance is mandatory. This was the end of the instructor's speech, after which Peng and Mu were able to bump fists, declaring themselves a team for further testing. Soon, a camouflage-painted SUV was taking everyone who agreed to the training base area. Everyone made noise during the road, joyfully discussing the changing views outside the window. At some point, the car hit a rock, rocking violently and alarming the passengers. The driver turned to them to apologize for this mistake, but his smile made it very clear that he did it on purpose to keep everyone quiet. Peng sighed, remembering that he wanted to go see Tang Tang this morning, but she didn't respond to the knock on the door, and also didn't answer the phone. He just hoped that she was okay. The guy also thought that this might be connected with a secret that Tan still couldn't reveal to him. The transport shook noticeably again, causing discontent among others. Everyone began to be indignant that this was too much, but the driver made an excuse that this time he didn't do it on purpose. And besides, they had arrived. Already on the spot, they were all gathered to explain that the local mountain valley is a training base. Therefore, every centimeter of this valley is protected, and only monsters of ordinary and elite rank are present here. Each was given a wristwatch with a GPS receiver and an emergency call button. And the student's task was to survive in this place for a week. Once training in natural conditions begins, it will no longer be possible to retreat, because this will be equated to desertion. It was also explained that there are safe houses in the valley, shelters made of special steel, through which only monsters of a rank higher than the commander can break through, and that the houses have some food supplies. Thanks to these conditions, it was possible to survive in the forest for these 7 days. After this speech, everyone split into teams and set off, wanting to quickly find shelter or show that they were worth something. Without saying anything, Ping and Mu nodded to each other, indicating that they would move on together as previously agreed. The instructor started shouting into the loudspeaker for the students to hurry up. He also said that if someone does get eaten by the monster, that person will be found using the GPS signal and will take revenge, as if this could console someone. However, many considered it best to listen to the man and hurry up. Mu approached Peng, wondering what he was so passionate about that he froze in place. The guy drew her attention to the bird. It was a rain sparrow. Representatives of its species love wet places with water and are very sensitive to rain. Mu recalled that in cities these birds are kept in meteorological towers, and they also have a weak attack, but high speed. Peng noticed that it is much better to watch monsters in the wild, and that, in contrast to the monotony of the city, this place can be compared to a nature reserve, to which Mu only said that he is an excellent student. He is an excellent student in nature, and probably this is the key to his success. Pan laughed, answering that he was just waiting for everyone to leave because it was too noisy. But the mass of students had already moved into the forest, taking with them the noise of the crowd. And now Peng with Mu and their monsters could finally go in their small company. The first day of the test began for their team. They carefully explored the area and observed the environment. It took a lot of time, but they were able to find an iron house covered in camouflage, which must have been the very shelter they were told about. They decided to go inside and look around to understand what conditions they would have to live in this week. The house consisted of one small room with a small number of beds, which was apparently intended to divide the students into smaller groups. This was justified because there are no commander rank monsters in the valley, and if you unite in large teams, training will be pointless. On each bed in the room there were 10 bottles of water and 5 boxes of biscuits, which was enough food for a week, if you saved it. Mu showed Peng a protective suit that she found in the house, apparently designed to protect against dangerous creatures like the poisonous mutated mosquitoes that live here. But Pan, looking at such splendor, decided that he would rather use special repellent herbs than put it on himself. The guy suggested exploring the surrounding area and looking for prey, because he didn't want to eat only tasteless biscuits for the next week. Peng suggested using the size of Lianji to build a road, because now, if any danger is encountered, they can always return to the shelter. Mu greatly admired Peng's idea because he, as always, thought everything through carefully. Therefore, they followed outside, deciding to find some source of water nearby, which is a natural gathering place for monsters in the wild. Mu suddenly felt dizzy and complained about the strong stench of humus from the flowers and plants in this forest. In an attempt to maintain balance, the girl was going to lean on a tree. However, Pan stopped her, also indicating that she needed to be quieter, as if he was waiting for something. Afterwards, Peng asked Mu to order Lianji to attack the tree next to them with all his might, leaving the girl wondering what was so special about this tree. However, at school, all of Peng's plans were always accurate, so Mu saw no reason to doubt the guy's words and decided to trust his request. Mu gave the order, and Lianji hurried to attack the tree with all her might. As a result, a frightened snake fell from the tree, hitting all the protruding branches. Mu thanked Peng for saving her, because if it weren't for him, this snake would have attacked her. Peng explained that this monster is a green tree snake, which usually disguises itself as a tree branch, which is why it was so difficult to notice. And the snake's flesh contains toxins, so, unfortunately, it cannot be eaten by a person. But, after thinking a little, Peng suddenly remembered the technique he had mastered, thanks to which all the monster he received was transferred to Dazi, who was resistant to poisons. This meant that, purely theoretically, Peng could really eat this snake, especially since, according to rumors, the larger the snake, the tastier it was. And the green tree snake was quite large in size. A sound was heard behind Pan, and the guy turned around to see what it was. He didn't notice anything, and decided that it was just his imagination, while another snake was fleeing from a previously potential victim. Meanwhile, Mu called the guy over to her. It seems that she found something. It turned out to be a source of clean running water, as evidenced by the absence of any foreign odors. Pan was pleased because as long as they had clean water, the likelihood of successfully completing the task increased. Here, Pan was distracted by some movement nearby. It was a wild animal from a pond. The guy was overcome with indignation when he realized that they had simply spat on him in the most brazen manner. It was the green-skinned frog, a weak monster whose hobby, according to the system, was spitting on others and whose weakness was disliking the spitting of others. It was very strange, and besides, Pan wondered who in their right mind would decide to spit at a frog in response. Deciding not to dwell on this, Pan was about to leave, but the frog spat at him again. This time, Pan could not stand such impudence and spat at the frog in response. Pan was extremely pleased with himself, mentally mocking the stupid frog whose weaknesses Pan knew in advance. The frog could not stand such humiliation and roared, causing many response roars from under the water. They all appeared at once, terrifying Pan, who saw this sight, while Mu said something to him, not seeing this nightmarish picture behind her. Meanwhile, the frogs began to concentrate for an attack, apparently radically different from the previous rather harmless spitting. Peng grabbed Mu's hand and ran away, saying that they urgently needed to leave. As a result, many of the blows from the reservoir were completely taken by Lianji, as the most impenetrable and overwhelming in size from their company. They had barely been able to tear themselves away from the army of amphibians and were now trying to catch their breath. Mu couldn't believe that she had just had to run away from an army of frogs. It was just funny. Pan replied that one should not underestimate them. 1 or 2 frogs are not terrible. However, there were at least 1,000 of them in that lake, so there is no point in messing with them anymore. From his words, Mu realized that everything happened because of Peng. She tried to accept this fact, but it did not fit into her head. Pan didn't let her dwell on this for long, deciding to summarize the information they had learned today. According to their observations, in the north behind the forest, there was a frog lake. In the west, there was a path to the gate without dangerous monsters. In the south, there was a dense jungle with traces of a large predator. And in the east, there was a small slope leading to a spacious meadow with traces of herbivores. Mu suggested continuing to explore the area until it got dark. However, Peng enthusiastically stated that it would be better to go back to the shelter and eat instead now, causing both Mu and Lianji to be puzzled, and Dazi to be happy. Noticing the lack of reciprocal joy from Mu, Peng advised her to relax, Because if you work too hard on the first day, you will have no strength left for tomorrow. Mu said that in that case they should look for food, but Peng objected. He introduced the previously caught green tree snake to the girl's attention, which she was not at all happy about. But Peng added that he also had seasonings, mint cloves, golden nutmeg, blue-black grass, and some secret spice. Mu was sincerely perplexed when Peng managed to collect all this and where he kept it all. As it turned out, he had prepared in advance, knowing that they would have to survive in the wild. While they were talking and deciding what to do next, they were watched by cameras placed throughout the base. Inside the headquarters, vigorous activity was in full swing. Notes and conversations were being made about the results and failures of students. In particular, Peng's gaze, whom Jiang Bai had previously described as a capable coach, attracted his attention. Some laughed at Gao Peng's escape from the frogs, but admired his finding of food, which could be attributed to his ability to survive. The chief instructor stated that they were thinking narrowly, because Peng had a very short training period. The man noticed that Gao Peng's use of terrain, wilderness survival skills, need to surrender, and overall efficiency surpassed that of most other teams, so the instructor ordered the focus to be focused on this student. Peng and Mu with their pets, meanwhile, had already returned to their shelter. However, an unpleasant surprise awaited them here, which they did not expect. The door to the shelter was locked from the inside, and Mu was unable to open it. The girl began to actively knock, asking to open the door to the shelter for her and Pan. However, the students inside refused, saying that they had taken over this shelter and the two of them would have to find another one. Mu was upset, but understood the position of the students. They didn't care who was the first to take the shelter. Gao and Mu were to blame for the fact that they came across such selfish people. Peng tried to appeal to the teenagers, saying that it would soon get dark and dangerous outside, and he and Mu wouldn't even mind sleeping on the floor. Besides, there were only two of them. The next answer was the same rude refusal. They were told to leave and look for another shelter, making the excuse that this house was too small. Mu was very angry with this answer and wanted to express everything, but Peng stopped her. He told the girl that there was no point in arguing with such people and that, in the future, someone would definitely teach them a lesson. Mu had no choice but to agree with his words. The girl turned around to leave, but for some reason Pan, on the contrary, walked closer to the shelter. Mu was surprised by Peng's subsequent actions. She did not expect such a move from him. The guy simply took and tied the door handles of the shelter with a chain, closing the entrance from the outside, which in the future will not allow the door to be unlocked from the inside, which means leaving locked. While Pan was contently rubbing his hands looking at the work done, Mu asked where he even got this chain. Peng explained that he found a chain in the shelter. It was lying next to the table, most likely to strengthen the doors and increase the security of the shelter, and Peng put it in his backpack before leaving. The observers who had seen the entire incident through the cameras laughed heartily at the headquarters, saying that these two disciples were too good. Someone even called them little devils, while the chief instructor noticed that Gao Peng was actually very cunning. One of those present realized for himself that Gao Peng was much stronger than ordinary students. One could only wonder whether his strength and ingenuity would help him survive the next night without shelter in the wild, where so many monsters live. Meanwhile, Mu, Peng, and their pets still hoped to find shelter for themselves and went deeper into the forest. They did not notice that a wild monster was following and watching them from the shadows of the trees. After a while, Mu and Peng realized with regret that they would have to spend the night in the open air, because it was no longer safe to continue looking for something. Suddenly, Pan discovered nearby a tall trunk of a massive tree, the branches of which were at a height of 4 meters from the ground, which created excellent conditions for spending the night. They had the opportunity to build themselves a simple shelter. Lianji began hitting nearby trees to knock down as many branches as possible. After this, Peng began to make a comfortable place to sleep on that same huge tree from the extracted materials. After some time, the bed was ready, which everyone was immensely happy about. Mu exhaled with relief, because she could finally rest. While she was thinking about this, Peng had already managed to lie down and fall asleep, quickly and soundly. And Lianji and Dazi also followed his example. Without thinking twice, Mu took a blanket from her bag and also went to bed. Meanwhile, they were being secretly watched from behind the dense foliage of the forest. It was Tang Tang. She was not complaining about the negligence of her nephew and his team because they fell asleep at night in the middle of the forest without even leaving a guard on duty. Suddenly, she was distracted by some quick, subtle movement from the side. Tan didn't even have time to see the source of the movement. It was moving so fast, it made the woman tense. After a while, Tan realized that the moving figure was the Shadow Panther, rushing through the trees. Hiding, the woman thought that this monster was not too strong, and given Pan's current skills, this should not be a problem for him. Meanwhile, the panther accelerated and, releasing its claws and baring its fangs, set its sights on the team's shelter. She was almost there when suddenly Lianji caught the sound of her movements and sent out a distress signal, prompting the others to wake up too, because they were about to be attacked. Before Mu had time to wake up and understand what was happening, she was already astride her pet, with the wary Peng and Dazi next to them, ready to fight back at any moment. On the contrary, red eyes sparkling from the darkness, a panther settled on a branch, in which Mu recognized a monster of the shadow attribute. The girl could not determine the type and strength of the monster, but she also understood that a shadow attribute monster feels like a fish out of water at night. So Mu asked Peng what would be better to fight or just run away. But Mu didn't know that Peng had a system that allowed him to accurately determine the 15th level and overall class of the Shadow Panther. The guy reasoned that running away meant exposing his back to the beast, which would only anger him even more. While he was reasoning, the panther took off and rushed straight at the guy, but he didn't even move. At Peng's command, Dazi appeared between him and the wild beast to protect his master. Dazi dodged the enemy attack that was directed at him. After literally seconds and a few more dodges, having adjusted the moment, Dazi launched a retaliatory attack with the power of an electric charge, after which he bit through the enemy's body until it bled. Peng supported his pet from the side, analyzing that thanks to the electric attribute, Dazi paralyzed the enemy and reduced his speed. All this was the result of their intense training, thanks to which Dazi could now handle even a monster of a higher level. After a crushing blow, the panther fought back and jumped a decent distance to the side, thereby running away from subsequent blows, wounded and angry. But suddenly something made her tremble with fear, making her greatly regret the place she had chosen to land. The snake-like monster that emerged from the darkness and wrapped itself around a tree trunk was many times more dangerous and terrifying. Its glowing golden eyes were seriously frightening. The huge, creepy monster opened its fanged mouth, clearly expressing its intentions. Peng and Dazi, like the panther, froze in horror, trying to comprehend what they saw. Just a moment, and the shadow panther was eaten by a terrifying snake, and Pan and his team immediately rushed away, not remembering themselves from fear. The monster saw perfectly well how they were running away on Lianji, but did not chase them. Instead, the snake turned around and began methodically destroying nearby tree branches. Tang Tang still watched. She saw everything that happened, but realizing that Peng was no longer in danger, she considered it inappropriate to engage in a noisy fight with a snake that had adapted to the area. The battle could reveal the woman's location. Having come to certain conclusions, Tan considered it best to leave her place. Meanwhile, everyone at the headquarters was in a panic. Because an emergency had occurred, a monster was discovered that should not have been tested. But Instructor Chen ordered that no action be taken, arguing that giant anacondas usually have a calm character and do not attack without reason, which means this could serve as a good test for students. The commander agreed with him, considering his reasoning logical, and gave the order to the Burkett team to be ready to move in case the emergency button was activated. The next morning, as soon as everyone had time to wake up, Pan announced the need to return to the place of the previous night, because when they ran away, they were in a hurry and left a lot of useful things. Mu was not at all delighted with this idea, because they could not be sure that the anaconda had crawled to another place. Moreover, its weak points and methods of attack were unknown, which means the idea was extremely dangerous and reckless. But Pan objected, saying that the unknown is the main reason for returning, because data about the monster is the main strength of the trainer, and in the future it can save lives. Such dark thoughts often visited Pan, because they live in quite alarming times. Peng also drew Mu's attention to the fact that if they stay in safe zones all the time, they will only become weaker from time to time. Mu had no choice but to agree with Pan and run after him, catching up. Looking at the debris left after the anaconda's rampage, Mu lamented that their team could have suffered the same fate as the trees if they had not managed to escape. Looking around, Pan suddenly noticed out of the corner of his eye something standing out in the stump of a once strong tree. Coming closer, Pan could not believe his eyes. He looked at the huge white crystal in the rubble and read the characteristics of the system. The item turned out to be a woody space heart, a material with a space attribute, which is the main component for the development of a floating jellyfish, information about which is not on the market, which means no one knows how to find this material. Pan theorized that yesterday's mutated anaconda became so huge due to eating the same material, which also explained why it did not chase after their fleeing team. The snake was simply protecting its hunting grounds. The guy decided that he was obliged to take advantage of the opportunities that field training provided and collect as many rare materials as possible that he could find, and began to put into his backpack some of what he could find so far. As a result, throughout the next days of training, Pan purposefully hunted for rare materials, finding a lot of useful things for himself, enjoying it immensely. And so, on the 7th day, the training was successfully completed, as the commander informed the joyful students. The man also announced that the next trip is planned in 3 weeks, and all previously registered students will be able to attend for free. The next 3 days were declared days off before returning to the usual pace of study, which the students rejoiced at, because many only dreamed of rest after the test, which was not so easy for everyone. Peng also hurried to check his phone for messages from Tang, but was dumbfounded by the news about the locusts that appeared on the display. As it turns out, at the moment, all the news in the city of Chang'an is full of emergency situations. Peng became a regular listener to this news as soon as he returned home. It was reported that according to the latest research results conducted by Director Chen of the City Association, the monsters called dead leaf locusts are very afraid of fire. Only thanks to this weakness they have been contained so far. According to experts, there are hundreds of millions of locusts in the swarm, each of which reaches a length of at least 30 centimeters. Peng watched the news report with gloomy thoughts. He knew that things were bad. The guy was distracted from his thoughts by a call from Chairman Feng, whose research was recently reported on the news. The chairman said that the military had brought a new batch of voracious golden toads to upgrade their class, and asked if Peng could come to the association tomorrow. Hearing this, Peng was surprised and asked if the military wanted to use these voracious golden toads to fight the dead leaf locusts. The men present in the chairman's office during this conversation were extremely surprised at how the guy knew about the military's intentions. The chairman silenced the men with just one menacing look. He replied to Peng that he was right, and explained that thermal weapons turned out to be too ineffective for destroying locusts. So now an attempt is being made to find a way to fight based on the laws of nature. Peng realized that, in other words, the military wanted to find the locusts' natural enemies. The chairman, seizing on the guy's interest, reminded that Peng's participation in the project was paid for by the association. Peng immediately agreed, but asked that his monetary reward from the association be replaced with something else, for example, a commander-rank electric monster corps. The chairman hesitated a bit, mentioning that this was not possible by law, but considering Peng's special approach, this would not be a problem. The very next day, Peng was at the Chang'an City Coaches Association building, where Chairman Feng greeted him with open arms. The workers of the building began to whisper with all their might, discussing the fact that the chairman had personally come out to meet some teenager. The chairman began to escort Pan to the elevator, reporting that the military had already delivered the voracious golden toads yesterday. Noticing the man's tired appearance, Pan asked if he slept at all that night. He confirmed that he did not sleep, as he tried to do at least something with the delivered monsters, but could not achieve anything. Upon arrival, Pan was amazed at how huge the room was. Chairman Feng proudly introduced this place to him as the experimental department of the Monster Trainers Association. After that, the man waved his hand towards the laboratory and invited him to pass. There was already a voracious golden toad here, a monster on which an experiment was to be carried out. Peng, without realizing it, had already begun to analyze the object in front of him, thinking that these toads were descended from horned frogs, and their abilities were based on the earth attribute. Noticing his interest, one of the employees showed Peng a locust kebab of dead leaves, seasoned with dill. This dish was a favorite delicacy of toads, and Peng was encouraged to try feeding them. To the surprise of others, Peng decided to try the locust meat kebab instead, and even rated it 10 out of 10. Chairman Feng couldn't believe his eyes when he saw this. It was too unexpected. The experimental frog rebelled. She didn't like the fact that a person was eating her favorite delicacy, but Pan assured the monster that he had assessed the taste of the kebab especially for him and handed the rest to the frog. She happily swallowed the treat and became quiet inside her cage. Pan thoughtfully examined the remaining half of the iron rod on which the kebab was strung, coming to the conclusion that with such nutrition, the toad had a developed digestive system, since it was able to digest iron. When asked what specific characteristics of the toad the military wants to improve, the chairman replied that, first of all, protective and digestive abilities, as well as attack power. The chairman also presented the results of his previous research, in which he discovered that the voracious golden toads have an affinity for two elements, fire and earth. Also, as a result of the latest tests, it turned out that the flesh and blood of the toad have a high similarity to the fire orchid vine, but the properties of the flower are too weak. While listening to this calculation, Peng also read the system's information about the path of evolution of the toad. And indeed, the fire orchid was one of the auxiliary components. All the conditions had to be met correctly. Having made certain conclusions, Peng immediately turned to the chairman, proposing to approach the problem in a different way. But Chairman Chen was amazed at how quickly Gao Peng managed to come up with something. Peng gave an analogy with cooking, saying that if, when pickling a toad in a fire orchid vine, the taste is too weak and unsaturated, then if you change the cooking method, for example, fry it over a fire, the taste will immediately become richer. This example surprised the chairman. He was puzzled by Gao Peng's wording. However, Mr. Chen immediately suggested using demonic chili pepper, to which Peng happily agreed. Everything went in the direction he wanted. The chairman immediately sent one of his subordinates to the warehouse to get demonic peppers. He hastened to carry out the order, but in his thoughts he condemned the idea of comparing evolution with cooking, and at the same time Gao Peng, who has the title of the youngest trainer in the city. The chairman clearly saw the thoughts reflected on the guy's face. He hoped that in the future, he would understand that it is necessary to allow more talented people to contribute to the common cause for the sake of the movement of science as a whole. Sometime later, the red-haired subordinate returned with the required ingredient. After examining the brought demonic pepper, one could conclude that it was high-quality material. The subordinate who brought the pepper specially selected the best from the warehouse, so that in the future, the young coach's failure would not be attributed to low-quality material. Having ground the demonic pepper to the desired state, the chairman concluded that it was not ripe enough, but the experiment was continued. The chairman asked Xiaozheng to bring more river perilla, royal ginseng, and moon angelica, to which he dutifully hurried to fulfill the order. Watching the process, Pan thought that a couple more ingredients were missing. However, it would be too suspicious if he said this right now. So the guy decided to wait for the results of the experiment, and only then voice the additions. A little later, the chairman brought out the mixture. The evolution potion was ready. However, as soon as the resulting potion was injected into the toad, it exploded, making it clear that this formula was unsuccessful and the experiment failed. However, the chairman took this without any surprise and only instructed Xiaozheng to take a blood test in order to understand the reason for the failure of the experiment. As we found out, the cause of the explosion was the absorption of too much of the fire element, and the conflict of energies led to an overload. Following from the analysis, the fire element was not completely absorbed by the monster's body. Zheng was also able to conclude that, based on the experience of the chairman's previous experiments, if there was even a little fire element left in the pieces of torn flesh, then it would only be necessary to improve the formula and adjust the ratio of materials. However, the employee did not miss a jab at Peng, saying that the materials had not even begun to merge, which means the experiment was a failure from the very beginning. The chairman besieged him, pointing out that it was too early to label the attempt as unsuccessful, and that experiments needed to be continued to obtain as much data as possible. The chairman didn't even listen to Xiaozheng's attempts to be indignant, saying that they needed to continue. But the subsequent second attempt, followed by the third, also failed, leading the toads to explode. The staff behind the chairman and Gao Peng began to whisper, insisting that the formula was obviously flawed, and Coach Gao was too young and inexperienced, and was also saying more than he actually knew. Pan heard their words perfectly and grinned, anticipating everyone's surprise after the formula was perfected. The time had come, and Peng came up with the idea of using not only demonic chili pepper as the main ingredient, but adding another material. The chairman seriously thought about this proposal, saying that it was a rather bold idea. Peng recalled that the chairman had already trusted him, so the guy only asked for one more chance. Then the chairman asked what exactly was proposed to be used as the second main ingredient. Peng suggested taking soft black soil, a material with a predominant yin energy related to the elements of water and earth. This was supposed to protect the internal organs of the toad from the chili pepper, which the saliva of the tree sparrow would also help with, as the element of wood. It sounded quite unusual, but the chairman decided to try to play on this combination and opposition of elements. After some time, the next improvement was ready, and the potion was brought for testing on a small piece of toad flesh. The result was amazing. This time, a much larger number of fiery elements were absorbed. The chairman was pleased with the result achieved, and Peng suggested moving on to an experiment on a living monster to understand how the evolution potion would work. Having received permission, Pan immediately took the opportunity and injected the potion into the monster, thinking that this sufferer would later need to be given more treats in the form of locust kebab. After the injection, a huge amount of smoke began to emanate from the monster, filling the laboratory and causing everyone present to cough. Now the correct ratio of elements had been determined. All that remained was to add the necessary ingredients in time, and Peng suggested that the chairman leave the room, since it was now extremely uncomfortable to be in the laboratory. But the chairman only covered his nose with a handkerchief, saying that this was not necessary and that he wanted to observe the reaction up close. But after that, Peng asked permission to go out on his own for a short time. The guy wanted to catch his breath from the smoke, because the demonic chili pepper turned out to be really strong. Now Peng could only behave in such a way that no one would understand that he knew the recipe for the evolution potion from the very beginning. And besides, Peng only made some edits. The rest of the experiment was done by the chairman. At some point, the laboratory door opened and a man ran out, followed by red smoke. This must have signaled a successful end to the experiment on the toad. The evolved monster became larger and now had a rich red color. Xiaozheng also rejoiced. They all finally completed the job successfully and received the dual attribute of earth and fire. But while the others were rejoicing, Pan studied the data of the resulting monster and, unfortunately, it only possessed the fire attribute. But this was the best possible result in the rush. Later, military men with guns and tanks gathered on the battlefield of the Northern Front and were preparing for battle. Literally a few minutes, and an armada of locusts appeared on the horizon, which they have been trying with all their might to get rid of for several days now. They began firing phosphorus charges from the cannons. This was the most effective remedy against monsters that were unstable to the fire element. The incendiary ammunition had an effect. The monsters began to ignite in the air. However, it turned out that this was not enough, and the horde of locusts began to create a sand hurricane again. All attacks from the cannons began to be blocked by steady air currents. The commander ordered a ceasefire, since now it was just a waste of resources. The military was confused about what to do next under the current circumstances. But it was impossible to let the locusts of dead leaves get through to civilians. So it was ordered to start shooting from machine guns so that each soldier would kill at least one monster. And as soon as such a decision was made, monsters suddenly lined up on the battlefield, right in front of the tanks, red toads aggressively looking towards the hurricane. The red vapors emanating from the surface of the ribbed skin of the toads became a cause for concern for the locusts. Unexpectedly for the military, the hurricane caused by the raging monsters suddenly stopped. When one of the recruits asked where these toads came from, the commander explained that their colleagues had sent monsters to the front to help, developed by specialists specifically to combat the dead leaf locust. The croaking of the toads under the horde of locusts kept growing, putting pressure on the enemy. After some moments, the toads accumulated a sufficient amount of magma in their mouths and shot at the enemy at once. Just one large attack from the explosion, and the fried bodies of the locusts fell to the ground. What was left of them resembled the kebab that was fed to the toads in the laboratory. The military was shocked that the toads, in just one attack, dealt with a problem where tanks were powerless. The team captain, watching this spectacle, happily thought that now his soldiers would not have to take risks on the battlefield, and whoever was able to create such monsters must be very good. Later, one of the military vehicles drove up to the apartment building. Several people got out of the jeep. They interested the old people walking near the house. They were wondering who these people had come for, and one old man suggested that perhaps they had come for Gao Peng, because somehow a similar car had already taken him away before. Caught in the discussion of Gao Peng, one old woman mentioned that once, while walking around the area with her dog, she saw a guy walking home with a huge skeleton. The old man objected that this could not be true, but the second old woman said that she also saw it, and the huge skeleton next to Peng was also engulfed in demonic flames. Then, they decided to contact an elderly woman whose apartment is located directly below Gao Peng's apartment. She, with a sweet smile, explained that this is one of the guy's monsters and only looks scary, but in fact, helps people, just like her pet. A woman was doing embroidery sitting on a bench and asked her spider monster to thread a needle. He happily helped the hostess and handed back the needle with the thread threaded through it. The old man noticed that this spider was very capable. However, he had never heard a woman call his name. She only sadly replied that she could not give him a name, stroking the pet on the head. Meanwhile, Pan, who came out onto the landing, could not understand what was happening and why there were military men in front of the door of his apartment. The squad leader stepped forward and placed a box in Peng's hands, informing him that In accordance with the agreement between Peng and the chairman, as payment for the successful removal of the magma toad on behalf of the armed forces, the core of a commander-rank electric monster would be transferred. The man also stated that he himself nominated himself to complete this task because he wanted to personally meet with the researcher, which made the greatest contribution to the operation. On behalf of all his comrades in arms, the man expressed his deep respect and sincere gratitude, and the man also said that he represents all his comrades who died in the operation, because defending the homeland is the sacred duty of a military man. But no one wants to die in vain. As Peng watched the departing soldiers, he thought that he should participate more often in such research projects to help the front and use the system to discover new possibilities for evolution. And yet, Peng believed that it was not worth relying too much on the system, because it was much more important to increase your own strength and authority in order to be able to protect yourself and have a decisive voice in the experiments. Peng was suddenly distracted from his dark thoughts by the pressure on his leg. It turned out that it was Dazi who hugged him. Pan was touched by this display of care from his pet, because he, apparently, was trying to console him. Peng's direction of thought immediately changed. He remembered that the main ingredient for Dazi's evolution had just been delivered, which means he could upgrade his class right now. Peng immediately set about fulfilling his promise and began preparing the evolution serum. The resulting mixture looked quite scary, but Pan confidently offered the unusually colored electric soup to his frightened pet. Despite everything, Dazi liked this mixture, and he gladly ate everything that was on the plate. As soon as the portion was eaten, the effect was not long in coming. An element of electricity surged around the monster and its body changed. Now the centipede began to look even more terrifying than before. But after the effect manifested itself, Dazi fell down exhausted. His body was exhausted by the evolution that had taken place. Bu, concerned about his friend's condition, immediately rushed to share his favorite delicacy with him. But Peng stopped him, telling him that Dazi should rest now. Bu had to sadly eat his yin cedar needles himself while Dazi recovered. Meanwhile, Peng decided that he should finally finish the contract with Chunba and called the jellyfish to him. She, however, frivolously ignored him and continued to fly along her favorite trajectory. Then Pan resorted to a trick, taking out a bottle of orange juice from the refrigerator. The pet immediately bought it and flew closer. He was as frivolous as in everything else. And while the jellyfish was hugging the juice, Pan quickly pricked his finger with a needle and applied it to the pet's body. Pan was transported to the still weak consciousness of Chunba, although he apparently became braver, because he himself flew up to the guy. Peng proceeded to conclude a contract. He offered to become partners, on the condition that he would give Chunba such power that he would never have to fear anything again. However, he refused, saying that he needed more juice instead. Pan agreed to his request, even if it sounded very absurd, and promised to give him lots and lots of juice. Chunba was delighted, and the contract between the trainer and the pet was immediately concluded. Later, early one morning, an elderly woman sleeping at home was awakened by her monster parrot. He said that it was time to wake up and have breakfast, as the woman's husband used to do. Previously, he took care of her when she was sick, however. By the time the woman recovered, her husband had already died. She didn't know how to live on after this, but the parrot, who had learned her husband's constant phrases, allowed her to hold on. And now the woman felt that her time had come. The woman even felt that the ghost of her husband was here. He was nearby, and the woman cried with happiness, leaving with him. The soul left her body, which remained on the bed in the room, alone and lifeless. Peng woke up early in the morning to Dazi's screams that he was in terrible pain. The centipede rolled on the floor, languishing and complaining, and he put all his front paws to the source of the pain. Peng was perplexed. He immediately got up to check Dazi's condition. The guy was worried that something had gone wrong with evolution, and this was the reason for the pet's suffering. Taking a closer look, Pan saw a system notification that teeth were changing, although this was something strange for a centipede monster. At this point, the guy calmed down and told Dazi that, unfortunately, he would have to endure this in order to become stronger in the future, and in consolation, Peng patted him on the head. The next thing on Peng's mind was the evolution of Chunba, with whom they had finally made a contract. It was necessary to choose the path of evolution for the baby, and it was unclear where it would be better to go, in support or development of lethality. If you use the tree heart of space found by Peng as the main ingredient, you will get a forest spirit jellyfish with two attributes, healing and space. If you develop a spatial attack, the damaging ability will be simply terrifying, so somehow you don't want to completely abandon the development of the attack, going into pure support. but evolution towards attacking abilities will require a considerable amount of time and resources, which will cost a pretty penny, while the support path is relatively quick. As a result, Peng decided, let there still be a path of support. Chunba will be developed into a forest spirit jellyfish. When Pan left the house, he noticed that a large number of people were crowded on the street. They were animatedly discussing something. Many people raised their heads up, talking about the ghost and Granny Chen, as well as Old Man Chen. Puzzled, Pan also raised his head up and saw a huge, transparent blue bird in the sky, as if entangled in the northern lights. The system immediately issued a description, saying that this is a monster called the Guardian of Souls, which is held in this world by someone's strong soul. People continued to talk in fear, and based on what he saw and heard, Peng realized that Grandma Chen, his downstairs neighbor, had died. Suddenly, a rather unpleasant thought struck his head. Pan remembered the striped gray spider that his grandmother had, and that after the death of the monster's owner, nothing was holding him back anymore, so, at best, he returned to nature. But, at worst, he could suddenly become aggressive and start attacking people. Realizing that things were bad, Pan hurried to find the spider before something terrible happened. Pan reached the desired apartment, but the door was locked, and not a rustle was heard inside. Thinking about where the spider could be hiding, Pan remembered the specific character of gray spiders in general, and looked back at the upper dark corner of the corridor where the desired monster was. He began to sneak out of the shadows, sparkling with his bright red predatory eyes. But before the spider attacked the guy, Dazi came running and took a fighting stance, guarding his owner. The spider immediately remembered how this situation ended the last time, and also gave up. Peng and Dazi didn't even do anything, and Granny Chen's spider was already lying on the floor in fear. The monster trembled all over his body, looking at those present in anticipation. The spider remembered his mistress and her words that she was already too old, and death was just around the corner, so they would not enter into a contract, so that in the future, when he meets his fate, this person himself would give him a name. As if reading his thoughts, Pan said that apparently the spider was too sad from the loss of its owner. Therefore, beaming with a friendly smile, the guy offered to go with him and become part of his family. The very next day, Pan was seen on the street by crowds of surprised glances. Passers-by turned to look at him, looking at him and discussing him. Peng himself, beaming with a satisfied smile, walked into the office with two monsters behind him. They were Dazi and a spider. The people he passed by were actively discussing him, exaggerating, and saying that he was the trainer of the 5 poisonous beasts. Pan, meanwhile, mentally rejoiced that now a monster with high defense would appear on his team, although using a spider as a human shield seemed absurd. However, among the options for the evolution of gray-striped spiders, there is precisely a path with the development of cool protection, the materials for which are not difficult to find. Now Pan had to make a blood contract with the spider, and then improve it as much as possible in order to gain even more spiritual power. Given the spiritual power gained from making contracts and the evolutions of Dazi and Chunba, Peng hoped that he would soon have enough strength to make a contract with Bu. Now Peng is a little further that he hurried earlier with the evolution of Bu, because although the improvement was pleasant, now he has to accumulate too much spiritual energy. At the entrance to the office, according to custom, the guy was met by Secretary Xuan Xuan. However, she was unusually kind and for some reason called him Young Master, rather than the usual Master Gao. Suddenly, the mercy suddenly changed to righteous anger, and Xuan spoke indignantly about the many clients who had to be refused an appointment, because Peng had not appeared at the company for quite a long time. And besides, he did not even answer calls. Pan hastened to smooth the situation over, saying that today he finally had time, and today they would sort out all the problems together. But first, Peng handed Xuan a list of materials that he needed in the laboratory right now. Xuan only indignantly snatched the paper from his hands and walked towards the warehouse without saying anything. This reaction was unpleasant and frightening, so Pan breathed a sigh of relief when the secretary disappeared from his sight, albeit for a short time. Already in the laboratory, Pan immediately began concluding a contract with the spider, promising in exchange to give the pet the warmth of a family and salvation from sadness and loneliness. Next, having received the necessary materials, Pan began preparing a potion for evolution. Having received the finished composition, Pan informed the spider that he had chosen a class of armored spiders for its development, and, taking into account the steel-colored stripes on its body, the new pet was given the name Ban, corresponding to its appearance. Ren also explained to Ban that he carefully selected and prepared the ingredients for the evolution serum, and now all that remains is to feed on it in order to become much stronger. After that, Pan placed the vial with the potion in a special compartment of the container, and Ban entered the desktop phase of the process of evolution into a new species. Pan felt the pain that Ban was experiencing at that moment. This was influenced by the spiritual connection between them. But it was all for the sake of leveling up, so they both just had to endure the pain. Peng was distracted from his observations by Aishuan's laboratory opening the door. She happily reported that a client had come to them, and from the category of especially important ones, and therefore highly wealthy to pay for the evolution of a strong beast. Peng immediately reacted joyfully to this news. After all, their family has expanded, which means it's time to earn more money to support it. Upon returning to the office, Pan found the client there, a stately man in a light business suit with a security guard and a monster of commander rank. Taking care of the client himself, Peng asked Zhuan to look after the process of the spider's evolution for now, explaining that at some point it would be necessary to add. The handsome man introduced himself as Lu Ji, the owner of a small botanical garden, unfortunately destroyed by terrifying devil spiders, the renovation of which had not yet been completed. Peng said that he knew about the Eastern City Garden, which caused an extremely emotional response from the man, flattered that Mr. Gao knew about his garden. Peng felt awkward about this, because he was not a well-known enough trainer for such an attitude. But the man explained that he was recently lucky enough to attend a military banquet, where they talked about Gao Peng's incredible contribution. After that, the man got down to business and showed the monster that had to be improved. The monster, locked in a massive cage to Pan's surprise, turned out to be a nighthound. It is said that all canid monsters can evolve into the nighthound, whose pitch-black fur allows it to blend into the darkness of the night and absorb most of the light rays, for which this species is also called the shadow killer. The man said that he knew the rules about setting a price for the evolution of a commander rank monster by Peng himself, and asked the guy to name the price. Peng pondered, studying all possible paths of evolution, and selected those that did not require too rare materials or a lot of time. In this situation, there were still 13 paths left for the evolution of the monster. After analysis, Peng explained that upgrading was not a problem, and that a given monster had several evolution path options to choose from with different powers, to which the man replied that he was choosing the most expensive option. Then Peng, with a joyful smile, announced the price of 5,000 alliance credits. Even a clearly wealthy man was left speechless by the announced price. In the end, the deal was concluded on a note that was most pleasing to Peng. A terrible noise was suddenly heard from behind the door, to which Pan immediately reacted. The guy immediately ran to the laboratory, checking what had happened, and found Zhuan trembling and frightened there, who remained here for observation. She, with tears in her eyes, simply pointed her finger at the evolved spider, which had become bigger and scarier and, moreover, had broken its container. Pan assessed the result of his brainchild and was glad that the evolution of his pet into a gray armored spider was successfully completed, as previously planned. Guo also, Peng was dissatisfied with the fact that Ban broke the laboratory equipment, and moreover, scared Xuan with this trick, who was trembling with tears in her eyes. However, the guy was not going to take his anger out on his pet, and therefore only expressed the hope that, regardless of the available power, Ban would have sufficient control. Ban blushed from such concern and began to awkwardly run from side to side. At some point, because of this, he tripped over one of the pieces of equipment and fell. Pan was amazed. He did not understand at all why all his monsters were so clumsy. In the end, Peng asked Ban to just sit quietly without breaking anything in the laboratory until things were finished. Peng apologized to Xuan for making a mess and told him to order a larger container at his own expense to replace the broken one, and then prepare materials for the evolution of the hound and agree with the client to start the experiment next week. Now, due to the broken equipment, it was impossible to continue working, so Peng decided to leave early. He had other things to do besides working in the organization. On the way home, Peng thought that it was time to find more spacious housing, preferably in the suburbs, for comfortable trips out of the city for training and collecting materials, which meant he needed to contact a realtor. Waking up from his thoughts, the guy noticed that Ban, for some reason, began to walk sideways, and the thought crept into his head about whether he had mixed up the serum, allowing the spider to accidentally evolve into a crab. Upon arriving at the office, Peng met with the woman realtor with whom he had previously arranged for a property showing. She introduced herself as Xiao Liu. She escorted the guy to the transport rented for clients and repeated that Peng had previously left a request for a small house with a garden and a basement in a quiet suburb. The most suitable option had just been found recently. Xiaoliu handed Peng a tablet with photographs of the villa and explained that the building does not have a basement, but there is a large surrounding area, so everything can be completed in the future. In response to the question what kind of area this was, the realtor explained that she saw a prosperous dragon located near the lake and had a very low price, only 2,000 alliance credits. In addition, although this is a suburb, the territory is very poorly guarded, so we can assume that, in addition to the villa itself, most of the surrounding territory is given as a gift, which means a more advantageous offer than this cannot be found anywhere. But Pan decided not to rush because this whole description sounded too good. The guy drew attention to the photographs and clarified how fresh these photographs were, because they looked as if they were taken before the cataclysm. Besides, the plants in the background had not mutated at all. This raised doubts. The woman panicked a little because of his obvious suspicion and began to say that before the cataclysm, it was simply impossible to buy such a private villa, and even with several hectares of adjacent land, but now it is quite cheap. Pan was not satisfied with this answer. Such an awkward scene brought back bad memories and forced him to look for a catch, if not in the villa itself, then in matters of decoration or security because, judging by the photo, such a house should cost at least 3,000 alliance credits. However, in the early days of the cataclysm, due to social unrest, such suburban villas were turned into fortresses or abandoned. So if the villa matched the photographs at least 60%, then Peng would be satisfied with the deal. And there won't be any problems with security. Pan just needs his team of monsters, which he might even be able to feed for free at the expense of protecting the area. Xiaoliu admitted that the price of the villa is indeed very low, but the seller, despite the losses, still wants to sell the villa at that price. In the end, Peng decided to agree to inspect everything in person and make a decision afterwards. On the way to the rental vehicle, the woman noticed Ban and said that this crab was quite cute, praising Pan's taste. The guy corrected her in bewilderment, saying that, in fact, it was a spider, which caused an apologetic laugh from the woman. A strange sound was heard nearby, to which Pan immediately reacted by looking back. However, seeing no one nearby, Pan decided that he was just imagining things. The man in the shadow of the wall, meanwhile, smiled contentedly, because he managed to find and photograph the famous Master Gao, whom he had previously been looking for. Upon arrival, a female realtor immediately invited Peng to look at the house. Peng was amazed, because the building looked almost the same as in the photo, only the facade was dilapidated, but there were no more flaws. There was almost no dust inside, which meant monitoring the state of the decoration. The furniture was in good condition, except that the design was a little outdated, and some items in the floor would have to be repaired. All this again forced us to look for a catch. And suddenly another person appeared in the room, an unfamiliar middle-aged man. Xiaoliu introduced him as the villa seller, the man she called Boss Liu. He, in response to the presentation, said that he came for a personal meeting with Gao Peng, having heard that he was going to come to the showing of the house for sale. Pan was very surprised by his behavior because he did not remember that they knew each other personally. He replied that now in their circles many people know the name of Mr. Gao Peng, because he is the trump card of the traitor Feng Chen and the hero of the last military operation. The man immediately handed over a business card, saying that he was selling familiars, and if Mr. Gao was ready to cooperate, he would be provided with a 20% discount. Peng was a little puzzled, but noted to himself that this man knew how to run a business. Boss Liu asked how the house was presented to Peng, and Peng, without holding back, said that such a price was even too cost-effective. Peng did not understand why a villa, the minimum price of which, even in poor condition, should be valued at least 4,000 alliance credits, cost only 2,000. The guy wanted to know the reason for such a price. The man, a little reluctantly, nevertheless decided to talk about the fact that he bought this house for his parents in order to provide them with a comfortable old age, because they were simple rural residents who were not accustomed to the noise of a big city. All their lives, the parents worked for the benefit of their son, so the man wanted them to live happily. However, the appearance of monsters destroyed everything, and they did not have time to enjoy a wonderful life, only encountering suffering. At first, Boss Liu wanted to keep this house as a souvenir, but when he heard that Mr. Gao was looking for a similar house, he asked to give it to Peng for only 2,000 alliance credits. The man asked Peng to regard this as an investment in him, because young talents like him are the future of Chang'an City. After carefully listening to the man's story, Peng thanked him for his honesty and decided that he would still buy this house. Returning home to Bu and Chunba, the guy immediately notified them that he had brought treats that were even tastier than their favorite cedar needles and orange juice. All the monsters immediately responded and ran to the table, where Pan had already laid out what he had bought. A woman's voice was suddenly heard from the entrance. It was Tang Tang who came, noticing that Peng's house had become more lively. The woman immediately ran up to Dazi, noticing that he had increased his level, and even the number of his teeth had increased. She also mentioned that it seemed like Peng had recently bought a house, and the speed with which she found out this news amazed the guy. But before moving, he still had some renovations waiting for him, which he reported. Tang Tang immediately became inspired and asked to take her with him when the time comes, because there are many nuances in repairs, and Peng is still too young and inexperienced in such matters. Having received his consent, Tang Tang said goodbye as if nothing had happened, saying that she had some other things to do. The woman was glad that she had achieved her main goal because when the time comes, she will be able to buy herself a plot next to Pan's house. Then they will always be together. Later, Pan, along with his team of monsters, returned to the test area where they were brought with the class. Peng intended to return to the dark coal forest to obtain the woody cosmic hearts he needed to evolve Chunbu as soon as possible. Otherwise, he would have to wait for the next weekend, which was still an eternity away. However, before Pan had time to reach the place he needed, he met with a wild monster, and the first monster he encountered on the outskirts of the forest turned out to be an elite rank, a gray sand lynx, and Pan thought that it was really dangerous outside the city. The lynx quickly rushed towards Pan, pushing off from the trees and breaking branches in its path. However, Boo blocked the monster's path, crowding Dazi and not giving the lynx a chance to get close to his owner. Lynx wanted to continue the attack, however. When she saw her opponent and his decisive attitude, she immediately got scared. The lynx ran as fast as she could in the opposite direction, trying to save her life. She was shaking with horror in front of such a formidable enemy with the smell of death. But threads of Boo's blood entwined her limbs, not allowing her to escape from the clutches of the enemy. With one single blow, Boo defeated the wild monster, leaving only a puddle of blood under his body. Pan was amazed by Boo-chan's strength because his power had increased no less than 10 times compared to the time when he was a red river monkey. Such an increase was quite expected, but it was incredible to see with his own eyes. As it turned out, not only Peng but also Boo himself was surprised by the attack. He looked at his paw in confusion, realizing that he had not calculated his own strength. After all, Boo had never fought once after evolving, and in the future he would need to fill this gap with a lot of training together with the others. Meanwhile, Boo-chan himself recalled with a smile his first meeting with Pan, and the fact that, although he did not understand the guy's words then, he somehow felt that from that day, Pan would become everything to him. And so, after 3 hours of searching in several potential groves of cork trees, Pan finally found what he came to this forest for on his day off. Peng also remembered that last time, a green tree snake was also found in the trees. Apparently, they are attracted to these trees. After these words, Boo became alarmed and then discovered that one of the vines on the tree nearby was a tree snake, and therefore a potential danger to Pan. Therefore, without hesitation, Boo grabbed the hiding snake and tore its body into 2 parts. Boo also extracted a crystalline core from the enemy's body and handed it to Pan. Today's priority was to collect the tree cosmic hearts. However, Peng accepted the tree snake core as it was gifted from Boo-chan's heart. Pan praised Boo for the work he had done and, pointing to the tree next to him, the satisfied guy said that now he would need to hit the trunk. Just one subsequent blow smashed the tree trunk into splinters, leaving only its lower part. Pan immediately approached the stump, from which the arboreal heart of the cosmos could be seen, and began to collect trophies with inspiration, telling Boo that he needed to do the same with several more trees. Meanwhile, in another part of the same forest, there were 3 men who had arrived here on a tip from an informant. Suddenly, the mouse monster on the leader's shoulder caught strange sounds in the distance, which was immediately noticed. The man reported that some noise was heard in a certain direction, and they needed to check if it was their target. As they approached, the sounds became much louder and more distinct. It sounded like the sounds of blows, as if someone was boxing in the middle of the forest, which one of the men noted. Another laughed at him, saying that even the very idea of this was absurd, because the forest was infested with wild monsters, and the leader even ordered him to take the task more seriously, reminding him that they needed money for doing the work. Having reached the source of the sounds, all 3 saw in front of them an undead-class monster that was destroying centuries-old trees with just one blow of its hand. Such power amazed and made him doubt his capabilities, but the commander paid attention to something more important at the moment. He took out a photograph, checking it, and said that the guy was their target, however. The question arose of what he was looking for in the debris of the trees. The other two unanimously began to persuade the commander to retreat, because the customer had paid to clarify the types of monsters of this boy, which they managed to do, and now they should quickly leave before they were noticed. It became clear that this trainer was not so simple. Besides, in addition to the monkey, he had with him a huge centipede, which was clearly not to be trifled with. But the commander adamantly told them to shut up, telling them that they needed to take advantage of the chance and opportunity given to them.